Hello, friends, and welcome back to The Snoozy Scientist, where we gently explore the mysteries of our world, one sleepy yawn at a time. Wherever you are on this vast and beautiful planet, this space was made specially for you, a calm corner where science and curiosity can sit side by side to guide you softly into a deep sleep. Tonight, we're traveling back in time, not centuries, not millennia, but billions of years, to the very beginning of Earth itself. 4.5 billion years ago, this planet was not the home we know today. It was hell. Oceans of lava stretched across its surface. Asteroids rained down like endless bombs. The skies were thick with poison and fire. This was no paradise. It was chaos. It was destruction. Survival wasn't just unlikely, it was impossible. And yet, somehow, Earth endured. But only barely. Even after that first survival, it has died not once but 5 separate times in cataclysms so violent they almost erased life entirely. With every reset, life clung to existence by the thinnest of threads. If Earth's tilt had shifted just slightly, the balance of climate could have broken. Ice might have sealed the oceans forever, or scorching heat might have burned the surface bare. In either case, no humans, no life as we know it. As ancient as human history on Earth may seem, we have only been around for 0.004% of the entire history of this planet. For more than 90% of Earth's story, humans weren't even possible. Nothing about our existence was ever guaranteed. And yet, here we are, living on the only planet we know of, with liquid water on its surface, and the only cradle of life in the entire universe. But how? Why are we here? How did a burning hellscape become a blue paradise? Why did Earth survive when so many other planets remained barren, frozen, or scorched? Tonight, we'll drift gently through that impossible history, from cosmic dust, through fire and ice, to the fragile present moment where you now rest. If you enjoy these quiet journeys into wonder, I'd love it if you gave this one a gentle like and maybe tapped subscribe. It helps more curious minds, just like you, find their way to this calm corner of the internet. And if you're still awake enough to type, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. It's always a joy to see how far across the world this little sleepy corner of science travels. Now take a deep breath, let your shoulders soften, close your eyes if you'd like, and together, let's begin the impossible story of Earth. In the beginning, our solar system was not the calm clockwork place we see today. It was a swirling, crowded space filled with dust, gas, and countless young worlds colliding in the dark. Imagine a cosmic nursery where planets were not yet finished, each one shaping and reshaping through violent crashes. In this restless environment, something extraordinary happened, something that would shape the destiny of our own world. A newborn Earth was still forming, a growing ball of molten rock orbiting a young and fiery sun. But it was not alone. Another body, nearly the size of Mars, shared this same space. Scientists call it Theia. For millions of years, Theia drifted close, circling the same path as Earth, until one day their orbits brought them face to face. What followed was not a gentle meeting, but a catastrophic impact. When Theia struck Earth, the collision unleashed more energy than we can easily imagine. Mountains were crushed like sand, oceans of rock vaporized into clouds, and molten matter was blasted high above the surface. Entire pieces of Earth were thrown into orbit, glowing fragments swirling together around the wounded planet. Out of this chaos, a companion began to form. The moon, our silent neighbor in the night sky, was born from the wreckage of that collision. Its very presence today is a reminder of that ancient violence. In those early moments after the impact, Earth itself was forever changed. The young planet was covered in oceans, but not of water. They were oceans of magma, seas of molten rock stretching from horizon to horizon, glowing like a furnace under a smothering atmosphere of vaporized stone and metal. Imagine standing there, if it were even possible, the ground trembling with heat, the air unbreathable, the sky burning red and orange with drifting clouds of ash. It was a world that looked alive, but it was only fire and fury. Yet even in that destruction, something remarkable was happening. Gravity, that quiet but relentless sculptor of the universe, was already at work. It pulled the scattered debris of Theia and Earth back together, forcing the planet into a new shape. Shattered rock and molten seas began to settle. Slowly, the surface cooled just enough for crusts of solid land to appear, like islands floating on an endless molten ocean. These fragments would later shift, collide, and grow into the first outlines of continents. Above, the moon drifted into its orbit, still glowing faintly with heat of its own birth. The pull between Earth and moon locked them together, stabilizing Earth's tilt and creating tides that would one day influence the rhythms of life. In that moment, though, it was simply a strange and beautiful sight, a red-hot sky and a glowing companion circling overhead. The planet itself was restless, still shaking from the violence of its creation. Volcanoes erupted across the young crust, pouring rivers of lava back into the seas of fire. Asteroids and comets, remnants of the solar system's formation, rained down constantly, leaving scars on the surface. Some of these impacts brought with them minerals and elements that would become part of the building blocks of life. Every strike was both a wound and a gift. The atmosphere was no safe haven either. It was filled with thick clouds of carbon dioxide, sulfur, and water vapor. Lightning cracked across the sky in endless storms, striking the molten oceans again and again. The air shimmered with heat, glowing faintly above the boiling surface. For millions of years, the Earth was locked in this state, a violent and unrecognizable place, caught between destruction and creation. But amidst all of this chaos, order was slowly emerging. The molten oceans began to harden into rocky crust. Massive plates of land formed and drifted, carried by the restless movement of the magma beneath them. These plates crashed together and tore apart, creating mountains that rose and collapsed, reshaping the surface again and again. This cycle of destruction and renewal would continue for the rest of Earth's story, a heartbeat of the planet that still echoes in the shifting of continents today. The moon, orbiting steadily above, helped calm the chaos in small but vital ways. Its gravitational pull slowed the violent spin of Earth, lengthening days and nights into rhythms that life would one day depend upon. The tides it stirred began their ceaseless pull on the oceans that were yet to come. Without that companion, Earth might have spun too fast, its climate unstable, its path too wild for life to take root. It is strange to think that everything familiar, our landscapes, our oceans, even the quiet glow of moonlight on water, began with violence. That from a single catastrophic impact, Earth was reshaped into the planet we know today. The continents, the atmosphere, the cycles of heat and motion all trace back to those early fiery beginnings. And as Earth's crust settled into its restless rhythm, as the atmosphere swirled with toxic storms and the moon circled faithfully above, the stage was being set for the next great transformation. What began as fire would eventually cool into water. The molten seas would one day give way to oceans of blue, and those oceans would become something far greater than anyone could have imagined. After the violent collision that gave Earth its moon, the young planet did not calm quickly. It entered an age that scientists call the Hadean, named after Hades, the underworld of ancient myth. The name is fitting, for Earth at this time looked like a vision of fire and torment. Across the surface stretched oceans, but not the kind we know today. These seas were made of liquid rock, glowing with deep orange and red light. From horizon to horizon, rivers of lava surged and swirled, rising and falling as if the ground itself were alive. Wherever the surface tried to harden into black crust, molten waves broke through, spilling fresh fire across the land. It was a world where standing still was impossible because the very ground shifted, cracked, and boiled beneath any step. Above these fiery oceans, the atmosphere churned with poisonous gas. Carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur, and steam hung thick in the air. Clouds formed from minerals, vaporized by the planet's heat, filling the sky with a metallic haze that glowed under the red sun. Lightning cracked endlessly in this dense soup of chemicals, striking the lava below with bright flashes that lit the horizon like a constant storm. The air shimmered with heat, too hot for water to remain stable, too hot for any living thing to endure. Temperatures soared far beyond the hottest deserts we know today. Even the harshest landscapes of our modern world, like the Sahara or Death Valley, would feel like cool oases compared to the Hadean Earth. Rocks melted as easily as ice cream left under the sun. The ground itself shifted like wax beneath a flame. Nothing could survive here, and yet this very chaos was slowly shaping the foundation for everything to come. From the depths of space, Earth was still not safe. The solar system remained crowded with debris from its formation. Countless asteroids and comets sped through the void, their paths wild and unstable. Many of them found their way to Earth. The planet was bombarded constantly, sometimes struck by stones the size of mountains, sometimes by icy visitors carrying minerals and water locked inside. Each impact released an explosion greater than all the bombs humanity has ever built. Craters opened and magma gushed upward. The surface trembled under the weight of each strike, and the sky filled with ash and fire. Imagine looking upward at this time. Instead of a calm sky, you would see streaks of light as asteroids blazed through the atmosphere. Some burned up in a flash, while others slammed into the surface, sending towers of molten rock flying high above the ground. The noise would have been deafening, a constant thunder of collisions, eruptions, and storms. And yet, hidden within this destruction, important changes were beginning to unfold. The repeated impacts did more than scar the surface. They stirred the molten mantle beneath, mixing chemicals and elements together. Some brought vital compounds from the far reaches of the solar system, materials that would later help seed the possibility of life. Iron sank deep into the planet's core, forming the heart of Earth's magnetic field. Lighter elements rose toward the surface, shaping the crust that would one day hold continents. Even in its chaos, the planet was already organizing itself into layers, each with a role to play in the story of survival. Volcanoes erupted endlessly, feeding the toxic skies with gas and steam. Clouds thickened until they blocked out much of the sunlight, leaving the world dim under a glowing red haze. Rain could not fall yet, for any droplet that formed evaporated instantly in the burning heat. But the steam rising from those eruptions collected above, waiting for the day when the surface cooled enough to let it fall as liquid water. The moon, still glowing faintly from its own violent birth, circled overhead. Its pull tugged at the molten seas, stirring waves of liquid rock, much as it now moves our tides. Its presence slowed Earth's wild spin, gradually lengthening days and nights. Though the planet was far too hostile for life, the balance between Earth and Moon was quietly preparing the rhythms that living things would one day follow. The Hadean Earth was both terrifying and beautiful. Imagine standing in a world where the ground glowed, where rivers of fire stretched to the horizon, where the sky crackled with endless lightning, and the stars were hidden behind clouds of ash. It was not a world made for comfort, but it was alive with energy, restless and raw. For millions of years, this chaos continued, each eruption and collision carving new shapes into the surface. Slowly, the magma seas began to cool, though they remained violent and unsteady. crust thickened in places, only to be torn apart by impacts and eruptions. Yet every cycle of destruction brought the planet closer to stability. Every storm, every collision, every flash of lightning was part of a long process that would eventually transform this hell into something far gentler. And as the fires raged, and the ground boiled, and the skies stormed with toxic clouds, Earth's story moved forward, carrying the memory of its violent beginnings. The next stage waited quietly, hidden in the steam above and the minerals below, ready for the day when fire would give way to water. As the fires of the Hadean slowly began to fade, Earth inched toward a fragile balance. The molten seas that once covered the surface cooled little by little, and the hardening crust began to hold its shape for longer stretches of time. The endless volcanoes still rumbled, releasing plumes of gas into the sky, and steam collected above the planet in a thick and restless atmosphere. For millions of years, this vapor swirled, trapped by the heat that rose from the planet's wounded skin. Then, as the surface cooled just enough, something extraordinary happened. The steam began to fall, not in short bursts, but in sheets of endless rain. Imagine storms that lasted not hours or days, but millions of years. The skies opened, and water poured down in a relentless cascade. Every drop that reached the ground hissed and boiled on contact with the hot crust. But over time, the crust hardened enough to hold it. Slowly, depressions in the land filled, and streams ran together until they formed vast basins. These basins swelled larger and larger until they merged into a single, planet-spanning ocean. For the first time in Earth's story, there was water, not scattered puddles or fleeting pools, but massive rolling oceans that wrapped around the globe. From space, the planet no longer glowed only with the dull red of molten rock. It began to shimmer with deep blue, reflecting the light of the young sun. The sight must have been breathtaking, a once fiery world now draped in a cloak of water that would never fully leave. Yet not all of this water came from the sky alone. Beyond Earth, the solar system still swirled with icy bodies left over from its birth. Comets and water-rich asteroids streaked through space, their paths bringing many into violent contact with Earth. When they struck, they released bursts of energy that shattered crust and threw debris skyward, but they also delivered something precious. Locked inside their frozen cores was water, frozen for eons in the cold reaches of space. Each impact added to Earth's growing oceans, drop by frozen drop, until the seas deepened and spread even further. The surface of the planet was still restless, but the arrival of water began to change everything. The rain continued to fall, feeding rivers that cut channels into the young crust. Waves battered the rocky edges of the first continents, grinding them down into grains of sand and silt. The minerals carried by these waters mixed into the oceans, creating a swirling chemical soup. Lightning still cracked across the skies, striking the surface of the seas and sending bursts of energy through the water. Deep beneath the surface, hot vents spewed minerals and heat into the dark, creating pockets of warmth in the otherwise cold depths. Within these conditions, something remarkable was being prepared. The oceans became more than water. They became a laboratory, a cradle for the earliest chemistry of life. Simple molecules swirled together, breaking apart, then rejoining in new forms. Energy from lightning, sunlight, and volcanic heat drove these reactions forward. For ages, nothing living stirred, but slowly the building blocks of biology assembled themselves. Amino acids, proteins, and strands of material that could copy themselves all began to appear. Picture the scene. Above, the world was still unstable, with storms that could circle the planet for years. Volcanoes bled fire at the edges of the seas, filling the skies with smoke. Yet below the surface, hidden from the chaos, The quiet work of chemistry was underway. Each wave that rolled across the young oceans stirred the ingredients of creation. Each vent that released its heat provided a spark for possibility. The seas rocked with rhythm, preparing for a future no one could have predicted. The oceans stretched from horizon to horizon, their color shifting under the light of the sun. In some places, the water was shallow, lapping against rocky shores. In others, it plunged into great depths where sunlight could not reach. Here, in the darkness, the heat of the earth itself fueled strange environments where chemical reactions never ceased. What seemed hostile at first glance was, in truth, the perfect setting for life's beginning. For countless years, the oceans remained only water and minerals, stirred by storms and heated by the planet below, but every drop was part of a grand experiment. The world that had once been fire and fury now held calm basins where possibility could take root. Without these oceans, life could never have emerged. They were the stage on which the great drama of existence would one day unfold. The tides of the seas, pulled gently by the moon above, kept the waters in constant motion. Waves rose and fell, carrying their chemical cargo across the planet. Over time, these motions blended ingredients more thoroughly, allowing reactions to happen again and again. The oceans became a great mixing bowl, stirred endlessly by gravity, by storms, by heat, and by light. And in this mixing, the very first whispers of life were waiting to be heard. The oceans that now covered Earth were restless, constantly stirred by tides, winds, and storms. Minerals carried from volcanic eruptions mixed with salts and gases, creating a vast chemical soup. For millions of years, the seas rocked back and forth like a cradle, shaking together the raw ingredients of biology. Within these endless waters, nature was quietly conducting experiments. Many theories have been offered for how life began. Some scientists believe it started deep beneath the waves at hydrothermal vents. These are cracks in the seafloor where water seeps down into the hot rock below and returns as a boiling fountain, rich in minerals. Around these vents, conditions were harsh. Temperatures swung wildly, and chemicals bubbled into the dark. Yet it was here that energy flowed steadily, feeding reactions that might have built the first fragile steps toward life. Imagine a landscape in complete darkness, broken only by glowing plumes of heat rising from the ocean floor. Around these strange chimneys, chemistry danced, shaping molecules into new forms, some of which could link together and begin to copy themselves. Others suggest that life may have started in shallow tidal pools along the edges of the first continents. Here the sun's light could warm the water, evaporating it during the day and concentrating the ingredients left behind. As waves returned with the tide, fresh water rushed in, stirring the mixture again. Over countless cycles of drying and flooding, chemicals had the chance to bond in ways they never could in the open ocean. The shallow pools acted like natural laboratories, each one bubbling with possibility. There is also the thought that lightning played a vital role. The early atmosphere was filled with gases like methane and ammonia, swirling under heavy clouds of steam. Lightning storms flashed constantly, striking the surface of the seas and delivering bursts of energy powerful enough to break molecules apart and fuse them into new ones. Each strike was like a spark on a blank canvas, creating pieces of the puzzle that would one day fit together into life. Perhaps it was not one of these places, but all of them together, perhaps hydrothermal vents, tidal pools, and lightning each contributed in their own way, adding different ingredients to the recipe. However it happened, the important truth is that somewhere in the swirling waters of early Earth, simple molecules grew into more complex ones, from amino acids to proteins, from short chains to longer strands. The building blocks of biology slowly assembled themselves. At some point, The first structures capable of copying themselves appeared. They were not alive in the way we understand life, but they carried the ability to preserve information, to replicate, and to change over time. This was the moment when chemistry began to turn into biology. With each copy, small errors slipped in, and some of these changes made the molecules more stable, more efficient, and better at surviving in the chaotic environment. Natural selection had begun, not yet among creatures, but among the very molecules of existence. Eventually, the first single-celled organisms emerged. They were tiny beyond imagination, invisible without a microscope, yet they represented the first true life. Enclosed in delicate membranes, they could feed from their environment, process energy, and make more of themselves. These cells drifted in the dark oceans, fragile but persistent. They had no eyes, no brains, no voices, only the machinery to continue. And continue they did. They divided and spread, carried by currents, shaken by storms, scattered by tides. Each one was a spark of persistence in a world that seemed determined to erase them. Life in these early times clung to the most extreme environments. Some cells found safety near the heat of hydrothermal vents, where energy was constant though conditions were harsh. Others survived in the cold depths, where darkness was eternal. Still others may have lived in shallow seas, adapting to cycles of drying and flooding that would have destroyed anything less resilient. In every case, these first organisms proved one remarkable truth: life could endure. It is moving to think that everything we see today, from towering forests to vast herds of animals, from cities filled with people to the moonlit oceans, began with these simple cells. For billions of years, they were the only life on Earth. Their forms were simple, but their persistence was extraordinary. They weathered the storms, the volcanic eruptions, the bombardment of rocks from space. They multiplied in silence, their presence invisible to the eye, but profound in its consequences. These earliest cells began to shape the planet itself. As they fed and grew, they released byproducts into the environment, changing the chemistry of the seas and the skies. They were so small and quiet, yet they laid the foundation for every complex creature that would follow. Without them, there would be no trees, no animals, no people listening to this story tonight. The oceans continued to rock with motion, stirred by tides pulled by the moon and heated by the restless mantle below. Within their endless depths, the first sparks of life multiplied, adapting to every crack, every pool, every surge of energy they encountered. Fragile as they were, they carried within them the seed of all future possibility. For hundreds of millions of years, the single-celled organisms that filled Earth's oceans lived quietly, feeding, dividing, and drifting with the currents. They had no eyes to see the world around them, no brains to understand what they were, yet their presence was slowly reshaping the planet in ways far greater than their size suggested. Among them was a group of tiny architects that would change Earth forever, though not with gentle steps, but with one of the greatest upheavals in the history of life. These were cyanobacteria, minuscule cells that learned to use sunlight in a new and powerful way. By capturing light, they could turn water and carbon dioxide into food for themselves, releasing oxygen as a byproduct. At first, the oxygen they produced dissolved harmlessly into the oceans, reacting with iron and minerals that eagerly absorbed it. For ages, this process went unnoticed, invisible in the endless churn of the seas. But over time, the oxygen began to build. The oceans slowly became saturated, and the extra oxygen escaped upward into the air. For us, breathing oxygen feels like the most natural act in the world, yet for the life of that ancient Earth, it was poison. The atmosphere of early Earth had been thick with gases that allowed simple cells to thrive. To them, oxygen was not a gift, but a threat, a reactive force that broke apart their delicate chemistry. What we now call air was, for them, a deadly toxin. As cyanobacteria continued to bloom across the oceans, their oxygen spread further until the planet itself began to change color. Bands of rusty iron formed in the sea floor as oxygen reacted with the minerals, staining the rocks with red layers that can still be found today. These bands are like a fingerprint left by the first breaths of oxygen, a sign that the atmosphere was being rewritten. For many of the organisms that had lived peacefully for millions of years, this change was catastrophic. Oxygen seeped into the seas and the skies, and whole populations of microbes died. The world they had known was vanishing, replaced by an atmosphere that burned them from within. To modern eyes, it is easy to see oxygen as life-giving, but at this time it was the great destroyer. What scientists call the Great Oxidation event was, in truth, the planet's first mass extinction. Imagine the scale of it. Entire oceans filled with invisible creatures, snuffed out not by fire, not by ice, but by the very breath of their neighbors. The catastrophe reshaped every corner of the planet. Species that could not endure the presence of oxygen either perished or were pushed into the shadows of extreme environments where oxygen could not reach, such as deep beneath the seafloor or inside the crust of the earth. Only those that could adapt survived, clinging to niches that were shrinking with each passing age. And yet, from this catastrophe came the groundwork for something astonishing. Oxygen, while deadly to many, held a hidden potential. Its reactive nature meant it could release far more energy when used in metabolism. Life that learned to harness this energy could grow larger, more complex, and more powerful than anything before. It was as if the planet had lit a new kind of fire, and those that could use it would carry life to heights never imagined. The atmosphere thickened with oxygen, and over millions of years the sky itself began to change. A layer of ozone formed high above, built from oxygen molecules. This thin shield absorbed much of the sun's dangerous radiation, allowing life to explore shallow waters and, eventually, the surface of the land. Without this invisible barrier, Earth would have remained exposed to lethal rays, but with it, the door to new habitats slowly opened. What began as a disaster was also a transformation. The death of countless simple organisms cleared space for survivors to innovate. The quiet chemistry of the early seas was giving way to a new era where energy flowed more freely, where complexity could flourish, and where life would no longer remain confined to the microscopic. The catastrophe was not a sudden event, but a long struggle, unfolding over millions of years as the planet itself adjusted to its new atmosphere. Through this upheaval, cyanobacteria continued their endless work, multiplying and exhaling oxygen with every cycle. They could not know that their simple act of feeding would reshape the destiny of the earth. They only followed the rhythm of survival, yet their collective breath turned a toxic wasteland into a world that one day would hold forests, animals, and people who would look back and tell this story. The oceans, once thick with suffocating gases, now held the first whispers of a breathable atmosphere. The skies grew clearer, and sunlight reached the waters with new brightness. The catastrophe had left scars, but it had also created a stage for the future. Life had been pushed to the brink, but in enduring, it prepared for a leap into greater forms of being. The rise of oxygen changed the atmosphere forever, but it also set the stage for one of the most extreme chapters in Earth's history. With new gases swirling above and sunlight reflecting differently on the surface, the balance of climate tipped in a way that the planet had never known before. What followed was an age of ice so deep and so merciless that scientists believe glaciers may have stretched all the way to the equator. The world became a snowball. Imagine looking at Earth from space during this time. Instead of the familiar blue oceans and green continents, the entire globe gleamed white. Glaciers expanded from the poles, creeping slowly across the land until they met near the middle. The seas froze over, sealed beneath kilometers of ice. Even the equatorial regions, which today are home to lush forests and warm seas, lay buried under thick sheets of frozen water. The atmosphere turned cold and thin. With so much of the sun's heat reflected by the gleaming surface, temperatures plummeted lower and lower. Winds howled across endless plains of snow, sculpting ridges and cliffs of ice that towered like mountains. The oceans, hidden below the frozen lid, were locked away from the open sky, their surfaces sealed in silence. Yet beneath that ice, life still endured. In the dark waters that lay far below, small pockets of warmth remained. Volcanic vents on the seafloor continued to release heat and minerals into the surrounding water, and around these vents, microbes gathered, clinging to survival in an otherwise hostile world. They fed from the minerals and the chemical energy that poured out of the Earth's crust, shielded from the freezing conditions above by the kilometers of ice that acted like a lid. There may have also been tiny refuges near cracks in the frozen seas, where occasional openings allowed sunlight to touch the water. In these narrow windows, photosynthetic life could continue its work, though trapped in isolated havens. Life clung to the slimmest margins, adapting to a planet that had become almost unrecognizable. On land, glaciers scraped across the continents, carving valleys and grinding mountains into dust. Rocks shattered under the pressure of ice that moved like rivers, though at a speed so slow it could not be seen from one day to the next. The planet was silent except for the groan of shifting glaciers and the endless whistle of wind. For millions of years, Earth remained locked in this deep freeze, a snowball world drifting in space. It is haunting to imagine how close life came to ending here. The frozen shell covered nearly everything, and the few surviving organisms were trapped in isolated sanctuaries. Entire ecosystems were reduced to fragile fragments, hidden away in cracks and vents, waiting for the world above to change. Yet in that waiting, life showed its resilience. The same tiny organisms that had survived the heat of hydrothermal vents and the poison of oxygen now endured cold so absolute that it seemed impossible. The ice, though merciless, was not eternal. Deep within the earth, volcanic activity continued. Gases like carbon dioxide leaked into the atmosphere, building up slowly over millions of years. With the oceans sealed beneath ice, there were fewer ways for the gases to be absorbed, and so they began to accumulate in the air above. The planet became a pressure cooker of cold on the outside, but with heat quietly gathering from within. While the ice tightened its grip on the surface, volcanic eruptions painted the frozen landscape with bursts of ash and black rock, staining the endless whiteness. These dark patches absorbed sunlight, melting small regions of the ice, though not enough to free the planet completely. But they hinted at the possibility of change, reminders that even in the most frozen moments, Earth's story was still moving forward. Life, as always, adapted to these rhythms. Microbes huddled around hydrothermal vents developed ways to process energy without light, relying entirely on chemistry. Others found niches in briny pockets of liquid water that resisted freezing even under kilometers of ice. These hidden sanctuaries were like lanterns, glowing faintly in a world gone dark, tiny sparks of survival that kept the possibility of the future alive. For ages the snowball world endured, cold and silent, with its oceans locked away and its surface gleaming white beneath the sunday. Yet this chapter, as endless as it must have seemed, was only another trial in Earth's unfolding story. The ice pressed down, but life refused to vanish. It bent, adapted, and waited for the balance to shift once more. And eventually, that balance would shift. The same gases that had once poisoned the skies would build again into a force strong enough to melt the world free. But for now, Earth remained imprisoned in ice, its beauty hidden beneath kilometers of frozen silence, its life tucked away in secret corners, holding on with fragile strength until the thaw would come. When the grip of ice finally loosened, Earth emerged from its long frozen silence into a world transformed. Glaciers retreated, oceans opened to the sky, and the atmosphere thickened once more with warmth and light. For millions of years, life had been confined to hidden refuges, trapped in cracks, vents, and thin layers of water beneath the ice. Now, with the planet thawed and the seas stretching free across the globe, those survivors had space to grow, spread, and evolve. What followed has been called life's Great Awakening, a burst of diversity so rapid and dramatic that scientists named it the Cambrian explosion. In what seemed like a geological instant, the oceans filled with creatures unlike anything the world had ever seen. Before this point, life had been simple, mostly small cells and soft-bodied organisms drifting in quiet obscurity. But in the Cambrian seas, complexity bloomed like a sudden storm of creativity. Imagine swimming through those ancient waters. For the first time, the seas were crowded with visible animals, moving, hunting, and interacting in ways that had never been possible before. Some were no larger than grains of sand, while others grew to sizes that dwarfed everything that had come before. There were worms burrowing into the mud, shrimp-like creatures skimming through the water, and strange bodies covered with spines and frills. It was as if evolution had thrown open the doors to possibility and filled the oceans with every shape it could invent. One of the great breakthroughs of this time was the development of eyes. For billions of years, life had moved blindly, sensing its surroundings through touch or chemical signals. But now, creatures began to see. Eyes appeared in many forms, some simple spots that only detected light and dark, others more complex, capable of forming images. For the first time, animals could look around them, spotting both danger and opportunity. A new way of living had arrived, and it changed everything. With vision came predators. Creatures could now recognize prey from a distance and move toward it with purpose. Some evolved sharp spines, others grasping limbs, still others developed speed to chase down what they hunted. It was the dawn of pursuit, of attack, of defense. To survive, prey had to adapt as well. Many developed shells, hard armor that protected their soft bodies. Others became faster, slipping away before a predator could strike. Still others grew spines or toxins that made them difficult to swallow. This new balance between hunter and hunted drove life to diversify even faster. Every adaptation sparked a response. When one creature grew sharper teeth, another developed thicker armor. When one learned to swim more quickly, another learned to burrow into the seafloor for safety. The oceans became a living laboratory of competition, where survival demanded constant change. The Cambrian seas were also filled with color and movement. Trilobites, among the most iconic creatures of this age, crawled across the seafloor in great numbers, their segmented bodies protected by sturdy shells. Anomalocaris, a fearsome predator with grasping appendages and a circular mouth lined with teeth, prowled the waters, growing to lengths of over a meter, a giant compared to its neighbors. Tiny filter feeders sifted particles from the water, while sponges anchored themselves to the seabed, waving delicate arms to catch food. In this world, ecosystems began to form for the first time. Producers, consumers, and predators built relationships that linked them together in fragile webs. Life was no longer isolated, each cell surviving alone. It had become a network, with species depending on one another, competing, cooperating, and shaping the environment itself. The ocean floors were etched with trails where creatures crawled, the sediments filled with burrows and tunnels where animals hid, and the open waters crowded with swarms of swimmers searching for food. The Cambrian explosion was not just about new shapes and sizes, it was about the invention of strategies. Life learned to hide, to chase, to defend, to cooperate. Some creatures formed colonies, working together in numbers. Others specialized in roles that gave them unique advantages. This was the moment when survival became not only a matter of chance, but of adaptation, invention, and response to the ever-changing pressures of the environment. It is breathtaking to realize how quickly this transformation took place. In the blink of geological time, the Earth shifted from a world where life was nearly invisible to one where it filled every corner of the sea with variety and motion. The Cambrian explosion laid the foundations for all the complex life that would follow, from fish and forests to reptiles, birds, and mammals. It was the first great flowering of diversity, a burst of creativity written in the language of survival. And as these seas teemed with eyes, armor, and the first true predators, Earth's story carried forward into new chapters, each one building upon the last, each one shaped by the delicate dance between life and the changing planet it called home. For hundreds of millions of years, the oceans had been the center of life's story. They sheltered the first cells, cradled the early chemistry of biology, and became the stage for the great burst of diversity during the Cambrian explosion. But the Earth was more than its seas. Beyond the water stretched vast continents, empty and silent, their surfaces bare rock and dust, shaped only by wind, rain, and rivers. For ages these lands waited untouched, without a single blade of green or the shadow of a moving creature. That silence did not last forever. The first pioneers to break the stillness were plants. They began as tiny forms, little more than green films that clung to damp rock near the water's edge. These were not the towering trees or flowering plants we know today, but simple moss-like carpets, fragile yet persistent. Inch by inch, they crept further from the shoreline, carried by spores that scattered in the wind. Wherever moisture was enough to sustain them, they took hold. With each patch of green, the surface of the continents began to change. The plants trapped soil, holding it in place and preventing it from washing away in rain. They released oxygen into the air, thickening the atmosphere with each breath. Their presence made the land more welcoming, softening the hard edges of bare rock into something that could sustain other forms of life. In time, plants grew taller and stronger. They developed stems stiffened with new structures that allowed them to stand upright, reaching for the sunday. Roots pushed deeper into the ground, anchoring them firmly and drawing up water from the soil. Soon whole stretches of land that had once been barren, stone shimmered with green. Riversides turned lush, valleys filled with fern-like forests, and the continents began to wear a living skin. This green invasion opened the way for animals to follow. The first to step onto land were small and tentative, venturing from the water only briefly. Insects emerged, scuttling along the damp soil and feeding on the plants that now covered it. They crawled and climbed, spreading as the vegetation thickened. Some developed wings, lifting themselves into the air above the forests, becoming the first creatures to claim the skies. But insects were not alone in this brave expansion. From the shallow waters came amphibians, descendants of fish that had developed sturdy fins strong enough to push their bodies onto shore. These limbs, still clumsy and awkward, allowed them to explore the world beyond the water's edge. They gulped air into lungs that had once been only a backup to their gills, and in doing so, they found new opportunities. On land, there were no large predators yet, and food was plentiful. It was a risky step, but one filled with promise. Picture these first amphibians as they dragged themselves from the shallows. Their skin glistened, needing moisture to keep from drying out, and their movements were unsteady. Yet they returned again and again, each generation adapting more to the demands of land. Some laid eggs in pools near the shore, others carried their young in safer ways, each solving the problem of survival in a new environment. Gradually, these early pioneers pushed deeper inland, and the boundary between sea and land grew less absolute. The transformation of Earth's surface was profound. What had once been empty landscapes now echoed with new sounds: the rustle of leaves in the wind, the hum of insects, the croak of amphibians calling from riverbanks. Forests spread, drawing carbon dioxide from the air and releasing even more oxygen, altering the very atmosphere. The climate shifted as plants absorbed sunlight and moisture, cooling the ground and softening extremes. Soil deepened as roots broke down rock and organic matter accumulated. The continents that had once been harsh and silent now pulsed with life. Rivers that had carved barren channels now wound through green valleys. Hills that had been dry and lifeless now supported forests filled with buzzing, crawling, and hopping creatures. Each plant and animal added a new layer of complexity to the land, weaving it into ecosystems that linked soil, air, and water in delicate balance. This colonization was not sudden, but gradual, unfolding over tens of millions of years. With each generation, plants grew taller, insects became more diverse, and amphibians adapted more fully to life away from the sea. Step by step, Earth's continents transformed from deserts of stone into thriving landscapes. And still, this was only the beginning. The forests would grow taller, the animals larger, and the balance between predator and prey would take on new forms. But for now, what mattered most was that life had made the leap from sea to land, forever changing the face of Earth. The continents were no longer silent. They had joined the story, alive with movement, sound, and color, as the march of evolution continued into the unknown. As plants spread across the continents, their roots breaking stone into soil and their leaves thickening the air with oxygen, the green world continued to evolve. The small moss-like carpets and low-lying ferns that once clung to riverbanks gave way to something far more dramatic. In time, plants discovered how to grow taller, how to stretch upward toward the sun, and from that discovery the first forests were born. These forests were unlike the ones we know today. They were filled with strange and ancient giants, trees that soared tens of meters into the air, their trunks wrapped in thick bark, their crowns heavy with fronds instead of familiar leaves. Massive club mosses, horsetails, and early ferns rose together in dense swamps, their roots tangled in wet soil. The air was heavy with humidity, and mist often lingered above the dark green canopy. From horizon to horizon, the land shimmered with endless jungle, a vast kingdom of plants that reshaped the earth itself. Beneath these towering forests lay thick layers of swamp, fallen trunks and leaves piled high in the waterlogged ground, unable to decay fully in the damp conditions. With every season, more and more plant matter built up, creating deep beds of peat that pressed together under the weight of time. These swampy layers would remain buried for millions of years, slowly transforming into coal. Even now, the fuel that powers our modern cities carries within it the memory of those ancient forests, preserved as black stone born from trees that once reached for the skies. The atmosphere of this world was also unlike today's. Plants exhaled vast amounts of oxygen, raising its level in the air to nearly twice what we breathe now. With such abundance, the very chemistry of life shifted. Insects, which had first appeared as small crawlers in the undergrowth, began to grow to enormous sizes. Dragonflies with wingspans as wide as a hawk drifted through the mist. Millipedes longer than a person crawled across the forest floor, their bodies rippling in waves of countless legs. Even simple scorpions became giants, roaming both land and water with claws outstretched. Imagine walking through such a forest. If a human could have existed then, the air would be thick and damp, the ground soft beneath each step, the canopy so high it blocked much of the sunday. Strange calls echoed from the swamps, though few animals yet walked the land. The true rulers here were the plants themselves, and the insects that buzzed and crept among them. Above, massive dragonflies hovered, their wings shimmering like stained glass in the humid light. Below, giant millipedes coiled through the leaf litter, each movement sending vibrations through the ground. The dominance of plants during this age shaped not only the land, but also the climate. Forests pulled carbon dioxide from the air in staggering amounts, cooling the planet and shifting weather patterns. Rains fell more regularly, feeding the swamps and rivers that wound through the greenery. Storms carried moisture across the continents, ensuring that even distant valleys and hills were dressed in green. Where once the land had been barren stone, now it pulsed with life, its surface blanketed in forests so vast they seemed endless. These giant plants also created new opportunities for animals that were beginning to explore the land. Amphibians grew larger, crawling through the undergrowth in search of food and water. Some began to adapt to drier conditions, paving the way for reptiles that would one day rule the land. Insects, freed by the oxygen-rich air, experimented with flight, filling the skies above the canopy with buzzing swarms. The forest was alive with motion, yet still it was the trees that defined everything. Their size, their abundance, and their slow but unstoppable growth turned the continents into green labyrinths of swamp and jungle. The cycle of life and death in these forests was ceaseless. Trees grew tall, then fell, crashing into the swampy ground, where their trunks lay half submerged in water. Over time, entire layers of fallen wood and leaves pressed together, compacted by weight and soaked in the wet earth. Each layer was buried deeper, each season added new material, until the land itself became a vast storage of energy. It was energy that would not be used for hundreds of millions of years, waiting silently until humans uncovered it and set it ablaze to fuel their own age. The world of the forests of giants was a place of wonder and danger, of damp air and endless green. It was a world where plants ruled absolutely, where the air itself was heavy with oxygen, and where insects took advantage of that richness to reach monstrous sizes. It was the first time Earth's continents truly belonged to life, covered not only in scattered patches of green, but in vast interconnected ecosystems that spanned entire regions. And as the forest grew and thickened, drawing energy from the sun and filling the atmosphere with oxygen, they prepared the stage for even greater changes ahead. The land was no longer silent stone, nor even the quiet domain of mosses and small plants. It had become a kingdom of trees, swamps, and giants, alive with a new kind of rhythm that would carry the planet into its next chapter. The forests of giants had covered the continents for millions of years, their roots pulling carbon from the air, their trunks storing energy that would one day be pressed into stone. Insects had grown to massive sizes, amphibians had spread through swamps, and reptiles had begun to explore new forms that hinted at future dominance. It was a flourishing world, busy with life on both land and sea, yet fragile in ways no creature could sense. For beneath the surface, forces were stirring that would bring Earth to the edge of silence. Near the end of the Permian period, deep fissures opened in the crust of the planet. From them, fire poured upward. Vast volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia covered the land in floods of molten rock, stretching for millions of square kilometers. These eruptions were not short events, but waves of fire that continued for hundreds of thousands of years, releasing staggering amounts of gas into the atmosphere. The skies filled with carbon dioxide, sulfur, and methane, and the balance of the planet began to falter. As the air thickened with these poisons, temperatures soared. Heat trapped by the gases turned Earth into a furnace. Oceans grew warmer, their surfaces steaming under the relentless Sunday. Rain that fell from the clouds was laced with acid, burning leaves and washing toxic chemicals into rivers and seas. On land, forests withered and turned to ash, unable to survive in the poisoned air. Insects that had once thrived in the oxygen-rich atmosphere dwindled as conditions shifted against them. The oceans, once alive with coral reefs and swarming fish, began to suffocate. As carbon dioxide increased, it dissolved into the water, making it more acidic. The delicate shells of marine creatures dissolved, and whole reefs crumbled into silence. With the warming seas, oxygen could not circulate as before, leaving deep waters stagnant and suffocating. Entire layers of the ocean became dead zones, empty of breath, where no creature could survive. It was a slow-motion catastrophe. Species that had survived for hundreds of millions of years vanished. Trilobites, those hardy creatures that had crawled across the ocean floors since the Cambrian, disappeared forever. Giant insects, once rulers of the skies, dwindled until they were no more. Amphibians that had dominated the swamps collapsed in number, their fragile eggs unable to withstand the changing climate. Reptiles, though more adaptable, also suffered heavily as their food chains crumbled beneath them. By the time the disaster reached its peak, nearly 90% of all species on Earth were gone. The planet had come closer to total death than at any other point in its history. The Great Dying, as it is now called, was not a single event, but a drawn-out collapse, a combination of poisoned skies, suffocating seas, and relentless heat. Imagine walking across a land that had once echoed with the calls of amphibians and the rustle of insects, now silent and still. Imagine looking into oceans that had once shimmered with reefs and schools of fish, now murky and lifeless. It was as if the world itself had stopped breathing. And yet, even in this darkest hour, life did not vanish entirely. Pockets of survival remained, hidden in corners where the balance was less cruel. Some reptiles endured, small and unremarkable at the time, but destined to inherit the empty landscapes. Certain fish clung to life in streams that still carried oxygen. A few hardy plants managed to grow in soil that was not yet poisoned beyond repair. From these fragments, life would one day rebuild. The Permian extinction reshaped Earth completely. Whole families of creatures were erased, leaving room for new forms to rise. The world that emerged afterward was not the same as the one that had been lost. With the old giants gone, new opportunities opened for reptiles to diversify, leading eventually to the dinosaurs that would dominate the next age. What seemed like an ending was, in time, revealed as a brutal transition, a doorway through which the future had to pass. The memory of this near death remains written in stone. Layers of volcanic rock mark the eruptions that poisoned the air. Sediments stained with ash and minerals reveal the suffocation of the seas. Fossil records show the sudden absence of once thriving groups, their silence a reminder of how fragile life can be. And yet, they also show the persistence of those that survived, proof that even in the worst catastrophe, life clings to possibility. The Great Dying was Earth's closest brush with total silence, a moment when the story of life nearly ended. But the story did not end. Instead, from the ashes of extinction, new chapters waited, and the planet prepared for a different kind of life to walk its lands and swim its seas. When the Great Dying finally loosened its grip, the Earth was quiet in a way it had never been before. Whole forests had collapsed, oceans had lost their vibrant reefs, and countless creatures that had once thrived were now gone forever. Nearly all of life had been erased, and what remained was scattered and fragile. The silence must have seemed endless, as though the planet had exhaled and forgotten how to breathe again. Yet even in this emptiness, survivors stirred, carrying within them the potential to rebuild. Among those survivors were small, unremarkable reptiles. They were not yet the towering giants that would one day dominate the land, but they possessed qualities that gave them an advantage in this changed world. Unlike amphibians, reptiles laid eggs that could survive outside of water. Their scaly skin protected them from drying out, allowing them to move further across the land than others could. They could endure harsher conditions, and that endurance was the key to life after catastrophe. As climates settled and new ecosystems began to form, these reptiles started to diversify. At first, they were small and modest, scurrying across the barren landscapes left behind by extinction. But as time stretched forward, they evolved into a wide variety of shapes and sizes. Some grew into swift hunters, moving on strong legs that allowed them to chase prey across the land. Others became heavy-bodied grazers, feeding on the fresh growth of plants that was beginning to spread once more. Out of this slow recovery, the ancestors of dinosaurs emerged. The early dinosaurs were not yet the colossal beasts that would later dominate Earth. They were smaller, often no larger than a modern horse, but they carried the traits that would one day allow them to become rulers. Their legs extended directly beneath their bodies, giving them better speed and stamina than the reptiles that sprawled low to the ground. They were agile, resilient, and adaptable, qualities that mattered more than size in a world still finding its balance. While life on land was reshaping, the oceans too began to fill with new rulers. The seas, once nearly suffocated, became alive again with reptilian giants. Ichthyosaurs appeared, streamlined like dolphins but with reptilian bodies, slicing through the water with speed and grace. They gave birth to live young in the open ocean, a remarkable adaptation that freed them from the shore. Plesiosaurs stretched their long necks above the waves, their paddle-like limbs carrying them silently through the depths. Massive mosasaurs would later patrol the seas as apex predators, their jaws filled with teeth sharp enough to shatter bone. The oceans, which had once been ruled by trilobites and fish, were now home to reptiles of staggering power. Above the seas, flying reptiles began to test the skies. The first pterosaurs unfolded wings of skin stretched between elongated fingers, lifting themselves into the air to hunt for fish and insects. They were the earliest vertebrates to conquer flight, taking to the skies long before birds existed. With land, sea, and air now claimed by reptiles, Earth had entered a new age, one defined by their adaptability and ambition. As the continents shifted and climates warmed, ecosystems grew more complex. Plants continued to spread, filling valleys and plains with greenery. Forests of conifers rose, their needles pointing toward the sun, offering shade and shelter to the creatures that now roamed beneath them. Grazing reptiles fed on these plants, while predators pursued them with growing skill. Each step forward built upon the last, weaving a world that was increasingly alive, dynamic, and dangerous. What made this age so remarkable was the scale of possibility. With so many old lineages gone, there was room for survivors to experiment, to evolve into forms that had never existed before. From the small beginnings of reptiles came an explosion of diversity that would define the next 200 million years. Dinosaurs grew taller, heavier, and stronger. Some evolved into gentle giants that swept the land in herds, feeding on treetops. Others honed themselves into swift hunters, their teeth sharp and their senses keen. The oceans became arenas of pursuit and power, where reptilian leviathans stalked prey with relentless precision. Even the skies were no longer empty, as pterosaurs soared over landscapes that had once been silent. The earth itself seemed to prepare for this new dominance. The air grew thick with warmth, the continents drifted and collided, forming new mountain ranges and seas that shaped migration routes. Volcanoes still erupted, but in the gaps between catastrophes, life had time to flourish. It was as though the planet, having nearly lost everything, now offered itself as a stage for these new rulers to rise. The age of reptiles was not merely about survival, it was about expansion, invention, and the reclaiming of Earth by creatures that had once been small and overlooked. Their journey from modest survivors of the Permian extinction to the dominant forms of the Triassic and beyond was a testament to resilience. Out of near silence, they filled the land with thunder, the seas with power, and the skies with beating wings. The world that emerged after the Great Dying was no longer the same. It had been burned, suffocated, and emptied, yet from its ashes came something bold and unstoppable. Reptiles rose from obscurity to seize the future, and in doing so, they began one of the grandest eras in the history of life, an era where giants would walk, swim, and fly across a planet that had once been on the edge of death. As reptiles expanded across the continents, evolving into new forms and preparing for their long reign, the surface of the Earth itself was undergoing a transformation on a scale greater than anything life had known before. The continents, which had drifted apart and come together many times over deep time, were slowly colliding again. Driven by the restless motion of tectonic plates beneath the crust, land masses inched toward one another year after year, until at last all were bound together into a single giant body. This was Pangaea, the supercontinent that united nearly every piece of land on Earth. From space, Pangaea would have appeared as an immense expanse of rock and soil stretching from pole to pole, surrounded by a vast global ocean. Its sheer size was staggering. It contained deserts, mountains, rivers, and forests, all stitched together in one colossal landmass. But such unity came with extremes. The very heart of Pangaea was so far from the seas that moisture could rarely reach it. Without rain, the center baked beneath an unforgiving Sunday. Harsh deserts spread outward, stretching for thousands of kilometers, their sands shifting with relentless winds. Animals that ventured too far into these dry expanses found little water and even less food, and many perished in the silence of the dunes. Yet the edges of Pangaea told a very different story. Along the coasts, where the supercontinent met the surrounding ocean, the climate was wild and unpredictable. Warm air over the sea collided with the land, creating storms of immense violence. Rain poured in torrents, flooding rivers and reshaping valleys. Thunder echoed across the cliffs, and lightning cracked the skies in furious displays. While the center of Pangaea lay parched and still, its borders roared with energy, drenched in rain and lashed by wind. Life here had to withstand constant upheaval, adapting to floods one season and drought the next. The creatures that lived upon this immense continent faced challenges unlike any before. Some were forced to adapt to the desert heart, developing ways to survive with little water, burrowing into the sand, or traveling long distances in search of scarce plants. Others thrived along the coasts, where food was more abundant, but weather was unpredictable. The supercontinent shaped the very direction of evolution, forcing species to move, to change, or to vanish. Migration became a defining feature of life on Pangaea. With no oceans dividing the land, animals could travel vast distances across the connected continents. Herds of plant-eating reptiles roamed from one region to another, following the growth of vegetation. Predators trailed behind, their survival tied to the movement of their prey. Over millions of years, species that began in one corner of Pangaea spread across its surface, mixing and mingling in ways that would have been impossible on separate continents. The unity of the land created a unity of life, as animals and plants expanded their ranges across a single world. Mountains rose along the seams where continents had collided. These ranges cast long shadows across the land, blocking clouds and creating rain on one side and deserts on the other. Rivers tumbled down their slopes, carving valleys that carried life-giving water into the plains. The shape of Pangaea was sculpted by these forces, a vast and varied landscape of extremes where survival meant constant adjustment. Even the seas beyond the coasts felt the influence of Pangaea. The global ocean, known as Panthalassa, stretched endlessly around the supercontinent. Its currents circled without obstruction, carrying heat and cold in powerful flows that affected climates worldwide. Storms born over Panthalassa swept against the edges of Pangaea, battering its shores with unrelenting force. Marine reptiles swam in these waters, hunting fish and ammonites, their sleek bodies cutting through the waves. The ocean was boundless, yet the land it surrounded was singular and unbroken. The scale of Pangaea's existence was immense in both time and space. It endured for tens of millions of years, long enough for whole lineages of animals to rise and fall. Its deserts left behind vast deposits of sand that would one day harden into stone. Its coasts bore the scars of storms that reshaped them season after season. Its connected pathways allowed species to spread, carrying their genes across a single world. And in every corner of this land, the seeds of future life were being sown. But for all its unity, Pangaea was not stable forever. Beneath its surface, the same tectonic forces that had drawn it together continued to stir. The plates pressed and shifted, storing energy that would one day pull the supercontinent apart again. The deserts, the storms, the migrations, and the struggles of life across Pangaea were all part of a larger cycle that never ceased, the cycle of continents drifting, colliding, and breaking. For now, though, in this chapter of Earth's story, all the land of the planet lay bound as one. Creatures moved across it, oceans roared around it, storms lashed at its edges, and deserts consumed its heart. The stage was vast, and upon it life played out in forms both familiar and strange, adapting always to the extremes of a world that was both unified and divided by its own immensity. While Pangaea stretched across the face of the earth, uniting deserts, mountains, and forests into one immense landmass, the seas around it became a world of their own. If life on land was impressive, With reptiles beginning their march toward dominance, the oceans were even more extraordinary. Beneath the rolling waves of Panthalassa and the inland seas that pooled along the coasts of Pangaea, monsters rose to rule. These were not the same creatures that had once filled the waters with trilobites, armored fish, or simple mollusks. The new oceans were home to giants, predators of astonishing size and power, with bodies built for a realm without limits. Here in the deep, reptiles had taken the shapes of hunters, so specialized that the seas themselves seemed alive with their presence. Among the most striking were the ichthyosaurs. At first glance, they looked like dolphins, with sleek bodies and long snouts filled with sharp teeth. Yet they were reptiles, not mammals, descended from ancestors that had once walked the land. Ichthyosaurs swam with remarkable speed, slicing through the waves like arrows. Some species grew as long as 15 meters, their enormous eyes adapted for hunting in the dim twilight of deeper waters. They gave birth to live young in the open ocean, a miracle of adaptation that freed them entirely from dependence on the shore. In the vast blue, they were fast, efficient, and deadly. Sharing the seas were the plesiosaurs, with their powerful paddle-like limbs and bodies built like broad, armored barrels. Some had necks so long that they stretched for several meters, allowing them to strike with sudden precision at unsuspecting prey. Others developed shorter necks and enormous jaws, snapping through schools of fish with terrifying force. They glided silently, rising to the surface for air before diving once more into the hunt. Imagine standing on the edge of a shore during this time, the water calm one moment, then broken by the long neck of a plesiosaur reaching upward before vanishing again into the depths. Yet even the most fearsome reptiles of the sea shared their world with creatures older and stranger still. Ammonites, coiled-shelled relatives of modern squids and octopuses, drifted through the waters in vast numbers. Their shells, spiraled and patterned, carried them across the seas with delicate precision, but they were not defenseless. Some grew to the size of wagon wheels, their shells offering protection from predators, while their tentacles reached out to snatch passing prey. Ammonites became so abundant that their remains today serve as one of the clearest records of this time, fossils scattered across stone from every corner of the earth. These oceans were deadlier than the land. On the continents, early dinosaurs and reptiles were only beginning to grow in size and power, but beneath the waves, the arms race of survival had already reached extraordinary heights. Each predator was fast, sharp, and relentless, and each prey species evolved new ways to escape or endure. The seas were alive with constant pursuit. Schools of fish darted like silver storms, ammonites spun away in spirals, and great reptiles lunged with jaws wide enough to swallow them whole. The dominance of these marine reptiles lasted for millions of years. They filled every niche, from shallow coastal lagoons to the black waters of the deep ocean. Some hunted close to shore, snatching fish and cephalopods in ambush, while others roamed the open seas in long migrations, crossing vast distances in search of food. The balance of predator and prey shaped every corner of the marine world. Even the skies above the oceans were tied to this drama. Early pterosaurs, flying reptiles that soared on membranous wings, often hunted along the coasts, plunging into the water to grab fish near the surface. Their cries mingled with the splash of reptilian hunters below, binding the sea and air into a single ecosystem where no place was safe. The oceans of monsters were not quiet places. They roared with storms that battered the coasts, and below the surface, they pulsed with the struggles of life and death. Each hunt, each chase, each desperate escape added to the unfolding story of survival. For millions upon millions of years, These seas were the stage for some of the greatest predators Earth has ever known, a reminder that while land was changing, the true power often lay beneath the waves. And even as the continents shifted and life on land prepared for its golden age of dinosaurs, the oceans remained a world unto themselves, filled with creatures so strange and powerful that they seemed born from dreams rather than from the steady hand of evolution. Here, in the rolling waters of the ancient earth, giants swam, ammonites drifted, and predators ruled a kingdom without boundaries. As the oceans filled with monsters and ammonites drifted through the tides, the land above them was changing in ways that would define one of the most famous chapters in Earth's history. From small, modest ancestors that had survived the Great Dying, dinosaurs began to evolve. At first, they were not giants. Many were no larger than a horse, quick and agile, built for survival in a world still reshaping itself. Yet these early forms carried within them the traits that would soon allow them to rise higher than any creature before. Step by step, dinosaurs began to diversify. Some stretched upward, their necks growing longer so they could strip leaves from the tops of trees where no other animal could reach. Others grew smaller, faster, and sharper, designed to hunt in packs or dart through undergrowth after prey. Some developed armor, their backs lined with plates or spikes that turned them into walking fortresses. Others became gentle grazers, herding together in safety while they swept their tails through forests and plains. Each adaptation carved a place in the ecosystem, and soon dinosaurs occupied nearly every niche on land. The plant eaters were among the most impressive. Sauropods, with their massive bodies and impossibly long necks, grew to lengths greater than 20 meters, towering over forests as they reached for food high above the ground. Their footsteps shook the earth, leaving prints that would harden into stone for future eyes to discover. Moving in herds, they crossed valleys and riverbanks, stripping entire groves of vegetation before moving on to the next. Their sheer size made them nearly untouchable, yet they were not alone. Predators evolved alongside them, and some became the apex hunters of their age. Fierce carnivores like Allosaurus, and later the infamous Tyrannosaurus, developed jaws filled with teeth sharp enough to tear through flesh and bone. They hunted with power and precision, their senses keen and their bodies built for attack. Some stalked alone, while others worked together, bringing down prey many times their size. These predators ruled the land, and every creature that walked the earth lived in their shadow. But dinosaurs did not only dominate the ground. In the skies, their relatives, the pterosaurs, spread wide wings and soared above forests, rivers, and coasts. Some were no larger than birds, darting after insects, while others reached wingspans as wide as small planes, gliding over oceans in search of fish. With each beat of their wings, they claimed the skies, turning air itself into another kingdom ruled by reptiles. Even the seas bore their mark. While plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs were not dinosaurs but distant cousins, their rise during the same era meant that reptiles controlled nearly every environment on Earth. Whether on land, in water, or in the skies, this was their age, an age when their shapes and sizes seemed endless and their diversity unmatched. The Earth itself encouraged this reign. The climate was warm, with lush forests spreading across continents, rivers winding through plains, and vegetation abundant enough to support creatures of astonishing size. The continents were still joined in Pangaea for much of the early period, allowing dinosaurs to spread widely. Later, as the land began to break apart, new environments formed, and dinosaurs adapted yet again, evolving into even more diverse forms suited to every corner of the planet. Imagine walking through this world. Towering sauropods rise above you like living mountains, their shadows stretching across the land. Herds of horned dinosaurs graze in the distance, their crests and frills glinting in the light. Armored stegosaurs sway their spiked tails as they move slowly through ferns. Overhead, the shadow of a pterosaur drifts across the ground, while in the forest nearby, a pack of raptors waits silently, their eyes sharp, their claws poised for the hunt. The earth was alive in a way it had never been before, every landscape filled with motion, sound, and danger. This was the height of reptilian power. For millions upon millions of years, dinosaurs thrived, their reign so long that if all of human history were a single day, their age would stretch across months. They adapted to floods, droughts, storms, and shifting climates, always finding new ways to endure. From tiny bird-like species to towering giants, their variety seemed endless, and in their time they became the very definition of life's dominance. The age of dinosaurs was not just another chapter in Earth's story. It was a golden era of giants and hunters, of wings and teeth, of herds and predators that shaped the land for more than 160 million years. Every forest, every plain, every coastline echoed with their presence. The Earth, having nearly died in the Great Dying, had given rise to a world of astonishing abundance, and at its center were the dinosaurs, the undisputed rulers of land, sea, and sky. In the age when dinosaurs shook the ground with their heavy steps and predators ruled with teeth and claws, a quieter revolution was beginning. It did not rise from giants or from thunderous hunters, but from something far smaller and more delicate. Among the branches of ancient forests and the undergrowth that lined the edges of rivers, certain dinosaurs began to change. Their scales sprouted fine, hair-like filaments that thickened into feathers. At first, these feathers may not have been used for flight. They likely offered warmth, trapping heat close to the body, or helped with display, turning some dinosaurs into living canvases of color and pattern. But with each generation, feathers became more complex, and what started as a covering for warmth or beauty became the key to a new kingdom in the skies. Picture a small dinosaur, no larger than a chicken, darting through the ferns. Its arms were feathered, its tail long and balanced, and its body light enough to leap higher than others of its kind. With a flap and a glide, it extended its jump, landing safely on a branch rather than the ground. Over time, those leaps grew longer, the feathers more structured, and the movements more controlled. What began as a scramble between trees slowly transformed into true flight. For the first time, the skies, once only home to insects and pterosaurs, were opened to a new lineage of creatures. The first birds were not quite like the ones that fill our skies today. They still carried traits of their dinosaur ancestors, with teeth in their beaks, claws on their wings, and long bony tails. Yet they also possessed the unmistakable features that would define all birds to come. Their feathers formed wings capable of beating against the air. Their hollow bones made them light enough to rise above the ground. Their bodies grew sleek and balanced, shaped not for running across plains, but for soaring through open skies. Archaeopteryx, one of the most famous of these early birds, lived during this time. Fossils of this creature show the blend of worlds it represented. It had wings with strong feathers, yet also the teeth and claws of a reptile. It was part dinosaur and part bird, a bridge across deep time that revealed how one form could slowly become another. To imagine it flying through a prehistoric forest is to witness evolution in motion, the very moment when Earth added a new dimension to the lives of its creatures. Flight offered opportunities that nothing on land could match. From above, these early birds could escape predators, gliding out of reach of claws and teeth. They could travel farther, moving between forests and valleys without the dangers of the ground. They could spot food from high above, swooping down to snatch insects, small reptiles, or fish from rivers. The skies that had once seemed vast and empty began to fill with movement, with wings beating softly above the canopies of trees. The evolution of birds was not only a triumph of survival, but also a transformation of ecosystems. As they spread, they carried seeds in their stomachs, dropping them in new places as they traveled, shaping the growth of plants. Their calls echoed through forests, adding sound to landscapes that had once been ruled only by the footsteps of giants and the roars of predators. Each flap of their wings connected them more firmly to the skies until they became creatures entirely at home there. The link between dinosaurs and modern birds is now one of the clearest examples of evolution's power. Every bird that perches on a branch today, every gull that drifts on ocean winds, and every hawk that circles above fields carries within it the legacy of those small feathered dinosaurs that first left the ground. The beaks and feathers of modern birds are not distant inventions, but direct continuations of traits that began long ago. Even their hollow bones and light frames are echoes of bodies that once darted through the forests of the Jurassic. What makes this story so remarkable is how it unfolded not through brute force or sheer size, but through grace and adaptation. While giant sauropods towered and predators thundered across the plains, it was the small and delicate creatures who discovered how to master the skies. They were not the strongest or the fiercest, yet they became part of a legacy that still thrives today, filling the earth with wings and songs. The first birds did more than just add a new form of life. They changed the very rhythm of Earth. They brought movement to the skies, carried seeds across continents, and helped weave ecosystems that balanced land, sea, and air. In their wings, they carried the story of transformation itself, a reminder that even in a world of giants, it is often the quietest revolutions that last the longest. While dinosaurs thundered across plains and forests, filling the world with their power and dominance, another story was quietly unfolding, almost invisible beneath the weight of giants. In the shadows of towering sauropods and beneath the claws of predatory hunters, small creatures scurried unnoticed. They did not roar or tower. They did not rule the skies with wings or the seas with teeth. Instead, they survived in silence, hiding in burrows, slipping through the underbrush, and waiting patiently in the cover of night. These were the earliest mammals, tiny survivors in a world where everything seemed to belong to dinosaurs. They were no larger than mice, shrews, or small rats. Their bodies were covered in fur, a remarkable adaptation that allowed them to keep warm when the nights grew cold and the giants above them slept. Their lives were spent mostly in darkness. By day, when the forests echoed with the footsteps of dinosaurs and the skies were filled with the shadows of pterosaurs, mammals remained hidden. They burrowed deep into the ground, sheltered in cracks, or curled in nests of leaves and twigs. Only when the sun slipped below the horizon and darkness spread across the land did they venture out, guided by keen senses that allowed them to thrive where others might falter. These early mammals were not rulers, but survivors. They fed on whatever they could find. Their sharp little teeth adapted for crushing insects, chewing seeds, and nibbling at roots. Some hunted in the leaf litter, using sensitive whiskers and sharp noses to track beetles, worms, and grubs. Others gnawed seeds or fruits that had fallen from trees, spreading the beginnings of a relationship between mammals and plants that would one day shape entire ecosystems. Every bite was a small act of persistence, each meal another step in the long game of survival. What set mammals apart in this era was not size or strength, but subtlety. They carried inside them traits that were unseen yet powerful. Warm-bloodedness allowed them to stay active even when the nights grew cold. Their fur gave insulation, and their whiskers heightened their sense of touch in the dark. Their large brains, even in these small bodies, helped them learn, adapt, and remember. And most remarkable of all, many nurtured their young with milk, a strategy that gave their offspring a better chance at survival in a world full of dangers. To imagine their lives is to picture a world of contrasts. Above them, massive herbivores grazed in herds, stripping trees bare with each sweep of their necks. Predators the size of houses prowled in search of prey, their roars shaking the forests. Yet beneath roots, in burrows dug into soft earth, the mammals listened quietly, hearts racing, ears twitching at every sound. At night, while the great reptiles slept or slowed, these small creatures came alive. They darted through shadows, silent and quick, eyes gleaming in starlight. The world was dangerous, but it was also full of opportunity for those who knew how to stay hidden. Their existence shaped them into creatures of caution and patience. Unlike the dinosaurs, who ruled with dominance, mammals ruled themselves through secrecy. Each generation learned to evade teeth and claws, to slip through places too small for predators to reach, to feed on what others ignored. They were, in a sense, the quiet architects of the future, holding tightly to survival while waiting for their moment. Even as continents shifted and climates changed, mammals endured. They were not bound to one habitat. They adapted to forests, plains, and coastal areas, always using the cover of night to their advantage. Their small bodies required little food, and their ability to eat a wide range of things allowed them to survive in conditions where specialists might fail. In times of scarcity, they could endure on insects and roots, clinging to existence when larger animals suffered. In the grand stage of Earth's history, they might have seemed insignificant beside dinosaurs that could block out the sun with their size. Yet hidden in these shadows were the beginnings of everything that would one day come. The mammals that curled in burrows, that suckled their young in nests, that darted through the dark with whiskers twitching, were laying the foundation for a lineage that would outlast the giants above them. The age of dinosaurs belonged to thunder and scale, but parallel to it ran a quieter story, told in the rustle of leaves at night and the scurry of tiny paws. It was a story of patience, resilience, and hidden potential. These mammals did not seek to challenge the rulers of their age. Instead, they endured, holding close to the edges of survival, waiting silently for a chance that had not yet come. And as the earth turned, as storms raged and seas shifted, as reptiles continued their dominance, the mammals in the shadows continued their quiet journey, shaping a destiny that even the mightiest dinosaur could not imagine. For millions of years, dinosaurs had ruled the earth, filling the land with giants that shook the ground with their steps and predators whose jaws could crush bone. The skies had become alive with wings, from soaring pterosaurs to the first true birds, while the oceans churned with monstrous reptiles and endless swarms of ammonites. Mammals remained in the shadows, waiting and watching, and the planet seemed locked in a rhythm that might last forever. But fate does not always honor the long reign of giants. Sometimes, in a single moment, everything can change. About 66 million years ago, a rock larger than Mount Everest and 6 miles wide tore through space on a collision course with Earth. It had been traveling silently for untold ages, moving faster than 20 times the speed of a rifle bullet. When it struck the shallow seas near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula, it unleashed more energy than billions of atomic bombs exploding at once. The world was transformed in seconds. The impact carved a crater over 100 miles wide, vaporizing rock and water instantly. A fireball brighter than the sun tore upward, igniting the sky. The ground shook with an earthquake felt across continents, waves of energy racing outward through the crust. Entire coastlines buckled as tsunamis, hundreds of feet high, crashed against the shores, swallowing forests and plains. But the devastation was not only at the site of impact. Molten debris was thrown into the atmosphere, glowing fragments of Earth itself flung into orbit before raining back down. As they fell, they heated the air until the sky glowed red. Firestorms erupted across the globe, igniting forests thousands of miles away. Animals fled, but there was nowhere to run. The very air seared their lungs, and the ground burned beneath their feet. For days the world blazed with flames that devoured everything in their path. Then came the darkness. Dust, soot, and vaporized rock rose into the stratosphere, spreading around the planet in a choking veil. The sun dimmed, then vanished entirely behind clouds of ash. For months, perhaps years, the Earth lay beneath a sky that refused to let light through. Temperatures plummeted as sunlight could no longer warm the surface. Plants withered and died without the power of photosynthesis. Forests fell silent as food chains collapsed. Herbivores starved, and with them, the predators that had once ruled the world followed into silence. In the oceans, the same fate unfolded. With sunlight blocked, plankton could not survive, and without plankton, the foundation of marine food webs vanished. Fish starved, ammonites perished, and the great reptiles of the seas, once so dominant, dwindled and disappeared. The oceans, which had once roared with life, grew empty and still. The extinction did not come in a single moment, but in waves of collapse that spread outward from the strike. First fire, then famine, then the long freeze that gripped the world. Animals larger than a few dozen pounds struggled to survive as ecosystems crumbled. Dinosaurs that had once seemed eternal, from the mighty Tyrannosaurus to the towering sauropods, could not withstand the chain of disasters. Within a short geological blink, they were gone, leaving only their feathered descendants, the birds, to carry forward their lineage. Yet even as giants fell, life clung stubbornly to existence. In burrows beneath the soil, small mammals huddled together, feeding on roots, insects, and seeds that remained. Their warm-blooded bodies allowed them to endure the cold nights, and their small size meant they required little food. Amphibians survived in sheltered waters. Crocodiles endured in rivers and swamps, waiting patiently as they had done for millions of years. Turtles retreated into shells that carried them through the darkness. These survivors did not flourish immediately, but they endured when the world seemed to be ending. The asteroid strike at Chicxulub ended the age of dinosaurs, but it also cleared a path for what would come next. The firestorms and darkened skies silenced the giants, but in the silence that followed, the mammals in the shadows would begin to rise. From tiny, hidden survivors, they would inherit a world reshaped by disaster. Out of death came possibility, and out of catastrophe came the beginnings of the age that would one day lead to us. The impact had ended in fire, in waves that flattened forests, and in skies that turned to flame. When the roaring stopped, silence spread across the earth, a silence heavier than any before. The world stood broken, the air thick with soot and ash, and the giants that had once ruled it were gone. Dinosaurs, the thunder lizards that had dominated for more than 160 million years, had vanished. Their bones remained, scattered across plains and buried beneath rivers, but their voices were stilled forever. Yet not every feathered creature fell. Some birds, distant descendants of small, ground-dwelling dinosaurs, managed to cling to life. They were not the great soaring pterosaurs or the giant predators with wings of shadow, but smaller species, those able to adapt quickly to eat seeds and insects when plants and prey had disappeared. Their light bodies, their ability to fly, and their versatility carried them through where larger forms could not endure. These survivors were fragile, yet they held within them the spark of the skies, a spark that would one day ignite into the diversity of birds we know today. Beneath the soil and in hidden burrows, mammals stirred. For millions of years they had lived in secrecy, keeping to shadows, moving by night, and evading the gaze of predators that towered over them. Now, in the strange new silence, they began to emerge. Their paws pressed against ash-coated ground, their whiskers twitched as they sniffed the cold air, and their sharp eyes scanned a world emptied of the giants that had once made every step dangerous. At first, these mammals were small, no bigger than mice, shrews, or rabbits. They fed on seeds that had been buried before the forests burned, on insects that survived in cracks and beneath stones, and on roots that still clung stubbornly to the earth. Their diets were flexible, and their small bodies needed little food. While massive herbivores had starved when plants died, and predators collapsed when prey vanished, these creatures found a way to endure. In their quiet persistence lay the seeds of everything that would come next. The earth itself was scarred. Forests were reduced to charred skeletons, their trunks blackened and hollow. Plains that once teemed with herds were empty stretches of dust. Rivers and lakes were clogged with ash, their waters clouded and lifeless. The oceans, too, were shaken. Without sunlight, plankton had nearly disappeared, and with them the food chains of the seas had collapsed. Where ammonites once swirled in countless numbers, their shells now sank lifeless to the seafloor. For a time, the oceans echoed with emptiness, but even in this devastation, the planet stirred with resilience. Slowly, green shoots pushed through the ash. Ferns were often the first to return, their fronds unfurling across charred landscapes, painting blackened ground with hints of life. Their spores spread quickly, taking root in soils where nothing else yet dared to grow. As the skies cleared and sunlight returned, grasses and small plants followed. Each sprout fed the insects that had survived, and each insect, in turn, fed the small mammals and birds that scurried across the recovering earth. In this fragile balance, the future was being rebuilt. Where once herds of dinosaurs had shaped the land with their massive steps, smaller creatures now moved quietly, their influence subtle but profound. Mammals, no longer confined to the shadows, began to explore. Some grew larger, venturing into spaces left empty by vanished reptiles. Others adapted to new diets, experimenting with fruit, leaves, or meat. The age of giants had ended, but the age of possibility had just begun. The skies, too, began to fill once more. Birds, though fewer in number, spread out across forests and plains, carrying seeds in their stomachs and wings. Their calls pierced the silence, delicate yet defiant, the sound of survival echoing above the ruins of a lost world. Each flight carried with it the promise of resilience, a reminder that even after fire and darkness, life would not be silenced. The earth had reshaped itself many times before, in fire, in ice, and in the great churn of oceans and continents. But this reshaping was different. It was not only the land and sea that had been transformed, but also the very actors who lived upon them. The stage that had once belonged to dinosaurs now lay open for others. From the ashes of destruction, mammals rose cautiously, birds stretched their wings, and the planet prepared itself for a new chapter. The silence of the aftermath was heavy, but within that silence lived possibility. Tiny paws pressed into soft ash, feathers brushed the cooling air, and green life unfurled against black soil. The world had ended, yet in its ending, it had also begun again. In the silence left behind after the fall of the dinosaurs, the earth felt emptied of giants. The forests were burned, the skies were dimmed, and the oceans had grown quiet. Yet out of that silence, life stirred once more. The creatures that had once scurried in secret, hiding in burrows and feeding on insects and seeds, now stepped into a world without their towering oppressors. These were the mammals, and with each new generation, they began to claim the throne that had once seemed unreachable. At first, they were still small, no larger than shrews or rabbits, their bodies built for survival rather than dominance. But the absence of dinosaurs left gaps across the world's ecosystems, and those gaps were like open doors waiting to be filled. Mammals multiplied quickly, adapting with astonishing speed to the new opportunities. They spread into forests, grasslands, and coasts, each group evolving into new shapes and sizes. Some became swift runners, chasing prey across open ground. Others grew powerful claws to dig, while still others returned to the water, shaping their bodies for rivers, lakes, and eventually even oceans. The pace of diversification was like an explosion of possibility. In only a few million years, mammals grew from tiny insect hunters into creatures of every imaginable form. Some evolved into giants that thundered across plains, their massive bodies echoing the scale of the dinosaurs that had once ruled. Others became towering browsers, reaching into treetops for leaves and fruit. Still others became sharp-toothed hunters, their jaws powerful and their bodies built for speed and endurance. From the shadows of survival, mammals expanded into rulers of every environment. What made this rise so powerful was not only their size or shape, but also their adaptability. Mammals were warm-blooded, able to stay active in cold nights and harsh climates. They nurtured their young with milk, giving them a head start in the struggle for survival. Their brains, already larger in proportion than those of most reptiles, began to grow even more, giving them sharper senses and greater memory. With these traits, they could learn quickly, adjust to change, and pass on behaviors that shaped the lives of future generations. In this new age, the Earth began to see the first sparks of intelligence that would one day transform the planet. Early primates clung to trees, their grasping hands and forward-facing eyes helping them navigate the branches with precision. These creatures were small and vulnerable, yet their minds were beginning to notice patterns, to learn, to solve problems. In them, the seeds of reasoning were taking root. Other mammals developed complex social behaviors. Herds gathered together for safety, predators learned to hunt in groups, and mothers protected their young with fierce devotion. Cooperation and memory became as valuable as teeth and claws. The landscapes themselves shifted under their influence. Grasses spread across wide plains, and herds of mammals grazed in endless waves, shaping the land with their movements. Forests echoed with the calls of primates, leaping from branch to branch. Rivers and lakes stirred with mammals that had returned to the water, shaping the early ancestors of whales and dolphins. Each corner of the earth began to resonate with the sounds of mammals, from the thunder of hooves to the cries of hunters in pursuit. And as these creatures spread and diversified, their presence prepared the stage for what would come next. The age of reptiles had lasted for over 160 million years, yet in the span of a fraction of that time, mammals began to rival their former rulers in diversity and influence. They had not been born from dominance, but from patience and resilience, and now those quiet survivors had become the new architects of life on Earth. The throne that had once belonged to dinosaurs was no longer empty. It had been claimed by creatures that carried warmth in their blood, fur on their bodies, and intelligence within their growing minds. From fragile beginnings in the shadows, they had risen to reshape the world, and in their rise lay the path toward a future that would one day belong to us. The rise of mammals carried life into forms of astonishing variety, and as the Earth's climates shifted once more, those forms became even more extraordinary. The world entered a time of ice, when colossal glaciers spread across continents and frozen winds swept over open plains. It was an age of giants, of beasts shaped by the cold, and of ancestors who learned to endure against all odds. Imagine standing on a plain where the horizon is wide and endless, the air sharp with frost. In the distance, herds of mammoths move slowly across the snow, their great curved tusks gleaming in the pale light. Their shaggy coats ripple in the wind, thick fur layered over fat that keeps them warm in the bitter chill. They graze on tough grasses that push through frozen soil, their heavy trunks sweeping across the ground as they feed. To see them would be to watch mountains in motion, creatures so immense that the earth itself seemed to bend beneath their steps. Beside them lived other titans. Enormous ground sloths moved through forests, pulling down entire branches with their massive claws to feed on leaves. Some stood taller than a house when they rose on their hind legs, their slow movements hiding strength that could fell trees. On the icy plains, herds of bison and wild horses thundered together, moving in vast numbers across grasslands that stretched for miles. The land was alive with motion, shaped not only by the animals that roamed it, but also by the glaciers that carved valleys, rivers, and mountains as they pressed forward. Where prey gathered, predators followed. Among the most feared were the saber-toothed cats. Their muscular bodies were built for ambush, and from their jaws curved teeth as long as knives, sharp enough to pierce through flesh and bone. They lay in wait among shrubs or rocks, leaping with explosive force onto mammoths, bison, or unlucky horses. Each hunt was a battle, claws tearing, tusks swinging, the ground trembling beneath the struggle of survival. Dire wolves, larger and stronger than modern wolves, hunted in packs across the frozen plains. Their howls echoed through valleys as they worked together to bring down prey much larger than themselves. In every shadow, danger lingered, and in every hunt, life balanced on the knife's edge between survival and starvation. Amid these giants and predators, the ancestors of humanity began to step forward. They were not the largest, nor the strongest, but they carried with them something no other creature possessed in such measure. With clever minds, they learned to chip stone into blades, to carve wood into spears, and to harness fire against the cold. They worked together in groups, sharing warmth, food, and protection, their survival depending not on single strength, but on unity. For our ancestors, life during the Ice Age was a test harsher than almost any before. Each day was a battle against cold that could freeze skin in moments and winds that could strip life from the unprepared. Food was scarce, and to hunt meant facing creatures that dwarfed them in size and power. To bring down even one mammoth required patience, courage, and cooperation, and even then the risk of death was constant. Yet in these struggles, humanity's ancestors grew stronger. Fire became a shield against the endless night, its glow pushing back the shadows that hid predators. Clothing was stitched from hides, layered with fur, and shaped into protection against the frost. Shelters of bone and stone rose along icy plains, providing warmth and safety when the glaciers crept close. With each tool and each fire, they turned danger into opportunity, learning not just to survive but to endure. The Ice Age carved the earth in more ways than one. Glaciers cut valleys that rivers still flow through today. Mountains were sharpened, and plains were scoured flat. But just as the land was reshaped, so too were the creatures upon it. Mammoths grew thick coats to withstand the frost, predators honed their skills for hunting in the snow, and humans found within themselves the resilience and creativity that would one day allow them to spread across the entire world. The beasts of this frozen time were not just animals of flesh and bone, but symbols of an age when survival demanded greatness from every living thing. They filled the land with awe and terror, with herds that stretched to the horizon and predators that struck from the shadows. And within that frozen world, fragile but determined, humanity's ancestors walked forward, carrying fire, tools, and a spark of intelligence that no glacier could ever extinguish. From the frozen plains of the Ice Age and the roar of beasts that dominated them, a quieter but even more important story was beginning to unfold. It was the story of a creature that walked upright, carried tools in its hands, and carried ideas in its mind. These were the first humans, and though they were fragile in body compared to the giants around them, they carried within themselves something new, something that would change the course of Earth forever. Long before our own species appeared, there were others who came first. One of the earliest was Homo habilis, the handyman, living in Africa over 2 million years ago. They were small and not so different in appearance from apes, but their minds held a spark of ingenuity. They began to shape stone into simple tools, breaking rocks into sharp edges that could cut meat from bone or crack open tough shells. With each strike of stone against stone, they opened a door to a new way of living. For the first time, survival was not only about teeth and claws, but about what hands could create. As generations passed, another species rose, Homo erectus, taller and stronger, with longer legs built for walking great distances. Their very name, upright man, carried the meaning of their difference. They strode across landscapes with a confidence no primate before them had ever shown. Where forests ended and grasslands stretched wide, they followed herds. Where rivers wound across plains, they settled, using water to sustain themselves. Their tools grew more advanced, their lives more organized, and slowly, a new rhythm began to form in their existence. One of the greatest breakthroughs of these early humans was fire. At first, it must have been a mystery, a thing of terror that flashed in storms or erupted from lightning strikes. But in time, fire became a companion. They learned to guard it, to feed it, and eventually to make it for themselves. Fire brought warmth in cold nights, safety from predators, and the power to cook food. What had once been dangerous became essential, and around the glow of flames, groups gathered, sharing food, stories, and comfort. Firelight became the first hearth, the center of human life that turned darkness into safety. With fire came change in body and mind. Cooked food was easier to chew and digest, giving more energy and nutrition. This energy fueled the growth of larger brains, and with larger brains came greater awareness, sharper memory, and deeper cooperation. No longer were humans just another animal in the shadows. They were becoming something else, a species that could shape its environment rather than be shaped only by it. As their skills grew, so too did their reach. The ancestors of modern humans did not remain in one place. They began to move, step by step, across the vast landscapes of Africa. Rivers and plains carried them forward, and in time, their paths stretched even farther. With upright bodies and tireless endurance, they became walkers of great distances, exploring savannas, mountains, and coasts. Each step into new territory brought challenges, but also opportunities. They discovered new sources of food, adapted to new climates, and carried with them the fire and tools that had become their lifelines. Migration was not just movement. It was the beginning of expansion, the spreading of humanity across a world that would one day belong to them. The first journeys beyond Africa would come later, but even in these early days, the restlessness to explore and the ability to adapt were already written deep within their nature. Each journey built resilience, each trial sharpened intelligence, and each generation passed knowledge from parent to child. Life was still harsh. Predators lurked in the tall grasses, and sudden storms could sweep across the plains without warning. Droughts tested endurance, and rival groups competed for resources. Yet the first humans endured because they had something more powerful than teeth or claws. They had cooperation, the ability to share burdens, to defend one another, and to create bonds that carried them through hardship. Where one alone might falter, many together could survive. The image of these early humans is humbling. Imagine them gathered at the edge of a fire, the flames flickering against their faces, their eyes wide with thought. Around them stretched a world full of danger, yet within their hands glimmered the beginnings of mastery. They did not yet know what their path would be, that they would one day carve cities, build civilizations, and gaze at the stars. But in their tools, their fire, and their footsteps across the land, the story had already begun. And so, from stone chipped into blades, from sparks that became flames, and from restless journeys across Africa, the first humans carried forward the thread of survival that would weave into the tapestry of our species. The beasts of the Ice Age ruled with strength, but the humans who rose from those shadows ruled with minds that could imagine, create, and endure. The story of the first humans was not only about walking upright, making fire, or wandering across new lands. It was also about what they carried in their hands, about the sharp edges of stone and the ingenuity that transformed simple rocks into instruments of survival. Long before metal or machines, the earliest humans discovered that the earth itself could be shaped to serve their needs. With every flake chipped from stone, with every edge sharpened to a blade, they rewrote the balance between predator and prey. The earliest tools were simple but powerful. Stones were struck together to create sharp flakes, which could cut through meat, skin, and sinew far better than teeth or nails ever could. Bones could be cracked open to reach the marrow inside, a rich source of energy that no other creature claimed as skillfully. With stone edges, humans learned to butcher animals more efficiently, leaving less to waste. Over time, their tools grew more refined. Instead of random strikes, stones were shaped carefully into hand axes, with edges that could stay sharp through many uses. These axes were not just rocks, but objects of purpose, designed with thought and used with confidence. Holding a tool changed everything. A sharpened flake meant a rabbit could be skinned quickly. A hand axe meant a branch could be cut down or a carcass opened with ease. Tools extended the reach of human hands, giving them abilities their bodies alone could never achieve. And as each generation built on the knowledge of the last, these tools became symbols of intelligence, memory, and progress. The act of making them required planning, foresight, and patience. It required the ability to see not only what a stone was, but what it could become. But tools alone were not enough to guarantee survival. What made them powerful was the way humans used them together. Hunting in groups became a defining feature of survival. One person with a sharpened spear was limited, but many working together could bring down prey far larger than themselves. Cooperation turned small bands of humans into forces capable of challenging animals that once seemed untouchable. A herd of mammoths was no longer an impossible target when hunters worked with strategy, surrounding the animals, driving them toward traps, and striking at the right moment. This cooperation was not only physical but also social. To succeed in hunting or gathering, groups had to communicate, to share ideas, and to trust one another. Around fires at night, knowledge passed from elders to children. Skills of tool making, patterns of animal migration, and the memory of dangerous places were shared through spoken words, gestures, and eventually the first forms of symbolic thought. Slowly, culture began to form, weaving together survival with meaning. The use of tools also shaped human bodies. Hands became more dexterous, capable of precise movements that allowed for detailed work. Eyes grew sharper at judging distance and detail, while brains expanded to handle the complexity of planning and cooperation. Survival was no longer a matter of reacting to the world, but of shaping it. With every cut of a stone blade and every shared hunt, humans gained a deeper sense of control over their surroundings. Beyond the practical, tools began to take on something greater. Some hand axes were made larger than necessary, perhaps as displays of skill or symbols of status. Others were carefully shaped with symmetry and balance that went beyond simple utility. These choices hinted at the beginnings of creativity, at minds that sought beauty and order even in the act of survival. From these small sparks, art, expression, and tradition would eventually grow. The world responded to these changes. As humans became more effective hunters, the balance of ecosystems shifted. Prey animals adapted, becoming quicker or more cautious. Predators began to compete with humans for food, and in time, many would find themselves driven into decline by this new, intelligent challenger. Humans were not the strongest or the fastest, but with stone in their hands and cooperation in their hearts, they were becoming the most adaptable force the Earth had ever seen. Life was still harsh and uncertain, but tools gave each group the power to face challenges with confidence. A storm might sweep through the plains, yet with fire and shelter built by hands, survival was possible. A predator might stalk the shadows, but with spears and teamwork, even danger could be pushed back. Every chipped stone, every sharpened edge, was another step forward, another moment where human will shaped the story of the Earth. The tools of survival were more than objects. They were the beginning of human culture, of shared memory, of lessons passed through time. Each flake of stone carried within it the mark of thought, and each fire-lit night carried the echoes of voices sharing what had been learned. And from this, the long journey of humanity gathered momentum, preparing for even greater steps ahead. The story of tools and fire gave humanity strength, but strength was never enough on its own. What truly set humans apart was their ability to adapt, to carry knowledge into new lands, and make those lands their own. In time, the restless steps of our ancestors began to leave Africa, crossing into the wide unknown beyond. With each migration, they entered places that tested their endurance, shaping them into the species that would one day cover the earth. The first great journeys carried humans into the Middle East, where dry deserts stretched in endless golden waves. Here the air shimmered with heat, and water was scarce, hidden in deep wells or short-lived rivers. Yet humans learned to follow the tracks of animals, to read the land for signs of hidden springs, and to carry fire with them to survive the nights when desert winds turned bitterly cold. Stone tools were shaped to fit new needs, sharper blades to carve tough hides, and sturdy points to pierce the armor of desert prey. Even in these harsh places, humans found a way not only to survive, but to grow. From there, some turned northward, moving into Europe and Asia. Here the world was ruled by ice. Glaciers stretched across mountains and valleys, and winters froze the ground until it rang like iron beneath their feet. The cold bit into skin, but humans learned to stitch furs together, to build shelters of bone and hide, and to keep fires alive for weeks at a time. They followed reindeer across snowy plains, hunted mammoths on icy steppes, and fished rivers that cut through the frost. Their endurance was tested daily, yet they endured, not because they were stronger than the cold, but because they could imagine solutions and share them with one another. Farther east, forests spread across Asia, thick and shadowed, alive with animals of every kind. In these deep woods, humans hunted deer, boar, and birds, crafting tools better suited for close pursuit and quiet tracking. They learned to use the trees themselves, carving wood into spears and bows that extended the reach of their hunts. Forest life required patience, listening for the smallest sound of prey in the undergrowth, and it required cooperation, hunters moving silently in unison. Each environment demanded something new, and in every case, humans answered with invention and resilience. But as humans spread outward, they were not alone. Across these lands lived other human species who had walked the earth long before us. In Europe, Neanderthals had thrived for hundreds of thousands of years, strong and well adapted to the cold. In Asia, other groups like the Denisovans had built their own ways of life. Encounters between these species were complex, sometimes hostile, sometimes mingling in unexpected ways. There was competition for food, for land, and for survival itself, yet there was also exchange. Evidence shows that humans interbred with these other species, leaving traces of their DNA within us today. Their presence shaped who we are, even if in time they disappeared. What allowed Homo sapiens to outlast them was not brute strength but flexibility. We adapted faster, invented more quickly, and built larger networks of cooperation. While Neanderthals often lived in small groups, modern humans created broader connections, sharing resources and knowledge across longer distances. This web of communication allowed us to endure when the climate shifted or prey grew scarce. Step by step, our kind began to take the lead, not by replacing others instantly, but by slowly becoming the more resilient branch of the human story. The migrations continued, wave after wave of people moving outward from Africa, following rivers, coasts, and valleys into new worlds. Each step expanded the reach of humanity, carrying tools, fire, and stories into untouched lands. Over tens of thousands of years, humans spread from one continent to another, always reshaping themselves to match the challenges they found. In deserts, they carried water and built shelters against sandstorms. In icy regions, they mastered fire and fur. In forests, they crafted weapons of wood and bone. No environment was too harsh, no landscape too vast, because the human mind carried solutions wherever the body could walk. The spreading of humanity was more than a migration. It was the unfolding of potential, the slow but steady rise of a species learning how to master not just one place, but every place it encountered. And as the footsteps of our ancestors pressed into new soils and crossed frozen rivers, they left behind more than tracks. They carried forward the beginnings of culture, the sharing of ideas, and the promise of a story that was only just beginning to expand across the earth. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans had lived as wanderers, moving with the rhythm of the land, following herds, gathering plants, and carrying only what they needed. Life was fragile, shaped by the seasons and bound to the whims of nature. But then, something shifted. Slowly, quietly at first, a discovery began to spread that would change everything. It was the planting of seeds, the taming of crops, and the keeping of animals. Agriculture had begun, and with it, the first sparks of civilization lit across the earth. It likely started by accident. A band of people may have dropped seeds while eating, and weeks later noticed that green shoots rose where the seeds had fallen. Over time, They learned that by placing seeds in the ground and tending the soil, they could bring forth food when they needed it, instead of depending only on chance. This knowledge spread, and humans began to plant wheat and barley in the Middle East, rice in Asia, and maize in the Americas. Each harvest meant security, and for the first time, families could remain in one place instead of roaming endlessly. With planted fields came the domestication of animals. Goats, sheep, and cattle were kept not only for food, but also for milk, hides, and strength to pull plows through the soil. Dogs, already companions, became helpers in hunting and guarding. Over generations, people shaped animals as much as animals shaped people. The bond between them built stability, giving humans a sense of permanence in a world that had once been defined by movement. Settling near rivers made survival even stronger. The Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates, the Indus, and the Yellow River all became cradles of early civilizations. Their waters fed the soil, their floods brought renewal, and their steady flow allowed fields to flourish. Villages grew along their banks, clusters of homes where families planted together, harvested together, and raised their children in communities larger than any before. These villages soon became towns, and towns became cities, their walls rising to protect what had once seemed unthinkable, a stable way of life. As food became plentiful, not everyone needed to farm. Some became builders, crafting homes, walls, and temples. Others became artisans, shaping clay into pottery, weaving cloth, or carving wood and stone into tools and ornaments. Some became traders, carrying goods along rivers or across deserts to exchange one resource for another. Human society grew more complex, with roles that extended far beyond survival. Specialization gave rise to culture, to art, to the beginnings of written language carved into clay tablets or painted on cave walls. The rhythm of life changed. Instead of chasing prey across the plains, people began to build calendars, watching the stars and the seasons to know when to plant and when to harvest. Stories were told not just of hunts, but of gods and spirits tied to the cycles of nature. Rituals emerged, ceremonies that brought communities together in shared belief and shared purpose. With agriculture and settlement came identity, not only as individuals or families, but as members of something greater. Kingdoms began to form as leaders rose to organize large groups of people to defend land and to manage the growing need for order. Walls and palaces rose, symbols of power and stability. Armies were gathered, and with them came conflict, for where there was land worth protecting, there were always others who wished to claim it. Human ingenuity built not only food and shelter, but also politics and rivalry. Civilizations began to leave their marks on the earth itself. Irrigation channels cut across plains, carrying water to thirsty crops. Roads stretched between towns, binding people together. Temples and pyramids reached skyward, testaments to ambition and belief. For the first time, humanity reshaped the landscape on a scale that echoed the forces of nature itself. Where rivers once carved valleys, now human hands carved canals. Where forests stretched endlessly, now fields spread in neat patterns of crops. The earth was no longer only a home, it was becoming a canvas of human creation. With each passing generation, the pace of change quickened. Cities became centers of trade and knowledge, their marketplaces filled with goods from faraway lands. Written words began to preserve memory, recording harvests, debts, stories, and laws. Music, art, and architecture flourished, turning survival into something more, into culture, into beauty, into the shared expression of what it meant to be human. The rise of civilizations was not without cost. Forests were cut down, rivers redirected, and animals hunted to extinction. The balance between humanity and nature shifted, and the earth felt the weight of human ambition. Yet even in these changes, one truth remained clear. What had begun as scattered groups of wanderers had now become builders of worlds, architects of societies that would echo across time. From the planting of seeds to the raising of walls, humanity's rise carried with it both triumph and burden. Civilizations had taken root, and with them the earth itself was reshaped. And this was only the beginning, for the story of humans was now bound not only to survival, but to the dreams of what they could build together. For thousands of years, human hands had shaped tools, plowed fields, and raised cities with strength powered by muscle, wind, or flowing water. Progress was steady, but always bound by the limits of the human body and the patience of nature. Then came a moment in history when those limits shattered. It was the industrial shift, a turning point when machines began to multiply human power and change the rhythm of the world forever. It began with simple innovations, wheels connected to gears, pistons driven by steam, and iron engines that breathed fire like mechanical beasts. With these inventions, a single person could do the work of dozens, and a machine could run without tiring, hour after hour. Factories rose where cottages once stood, their tall chimneys pumping smoke into the sky. The quiet fields of old villages echoed now with the pounding of hammers and the whir of spinning wheels. Life that had once followed the slow pulse of the seasons began to move to the relentless beat of machines. At the heart of this shift was the unlocking of a hidden treasure buried deep within the earth. Fossil fuels, the black coal pressed from ancient forests, and the liquid fire of oil drawn from underground, carried within them the sunlight of millions of years past. For ages these reserves had slept untouched, the compressed remains of creatures long extinct. But once humans learned to burn them in furnaces and engines, it was as though they had opened a time capsule of energy. The power of ancient carbon flowed into human hands, fueling factories, trains, ships, and eventually cities that never slept. The impact of this discovery was immense. Coal powered the steam engines that drove trains across continents, connecting distant lands with speed unimaginable before. Iron rails stretched like veins across the countryside, pumping goods and people from city to city. Oil and gas followed, fueling engines that carried ships across oceans and cars across newly built roads. The world shrank, not because the land had changed, but because travel and communication had become faster, stronger, and ceaseless. With this new power, human populations surged. Cities expanded as people left rural fields to work in factories, their days governed by whistles and clocks rather than sunrise and sunset. Skies darkened with soot, rivers filled with waste, and streets buzzed with the ceaseless motion of industry. Yet for all its hardships, this age carried with it an unstoppable energy. Knowledge spread rapidly, inventions appeared almost yearly, and new possibilities seemed endless. But this power came with a shadow. Every ton of coal burned, every barrel of oil emptied, released into the air gases that had been locked away since prehistoric times. Carbon dioxide, invisible but potent, began to gather in the atmosphere. It was a quiet force, unnoticed at first, but destined to alter the balance of Earth's climate. The air that had once been shaped only by volcanic eruptions or slow natural cycles was now being rewritten by human hands at a pace far faster than nature had ever moved. This moment marked the dawn of what scientists now call the Anthropocene, the age of humans. For the first time, A single species was shaping the entire Earth more powerfully than rivers, winds, or even glaciers. Forests were cut down to make way for farms and factories. Mountains were carved open for coal and iron. Oceans carried ships filled with goods that circled the globe in steady trade. No corner of the planet was untouched. Humanity had become a geological force, reshaping landscapes, altering ecosystems, and filling the air and water with its imprint. The industrial shift was not only about machines or fuels, but about how it changed the human relationship with time and progress. A farmer planting wheat thought of the next harvest, a shepherd of the next season, but now inventors, engineers, and entrepreneurs began to think in decades and centuries. Railroads were planned across nations, canals cut through continents, and cities designed to hold millions. Dreams expanded as rapidly as the engines that powered them. Yet with every gain came new risks. The same machines that carried people across the world also carried weapons forged in factories, their destructive power multiplied far beyond swords or arrows. Industry gave rise to innovation, but also to pollution, poverty in crowded cities, and deep scars on the environment. Humanity's triumph was entangled with its burdens, a reminder that progress always casts two shadows, one of creation and one of consequence. And still, the story flowed forward. Coal and oil blazed, railways and factories spread, and the earth itself bent under the weight of human ambition. The ancient sunlight stored in stone and liquid was being emptied into fire, and with it came the promise and the peril of a new age. From this point onward, the earth would never again be shaped only by nature. It would be shaped by us, a species whose machines had multiplied its reach and whose choices would determine the fate of the world it had inherited. For billions of years, Earth had been shaped by fire, water, ice, and stone. Volcanoes had carved continents, glaciers had sculpted valleys, and oceans had risen and fallen like a great heartbeat. But now, for the first time, a single species was reshaping the planet faster than any natural force. Humanity had entered what scientists now call the Anthropocene, the age in which humans became the dominant shapers of Earth itself. One of the most profound marks of this new age is the warming of the climate. For centuries after the industrial shift, coal, oil, and gas poured their hidden energy into furnaces and engines. The cost of this power was invisible at first, but it gathered quietly in the air. Carbon dioxide, methane, and other gases thickened the atmosphere, wrapping Earth in a blanket that trapped more of the sun's heat. The change was gradual at the beginning, but its pace quickened. The average temperature of the planet began to rise, and with it came a chain of transformations. Glaciers that had stood for tens of thousands of years began to melt, pouring fresh water into rising seas. Coral reefs, once colorful forests of the ocean, bleached white under the stress of warming waters. Storms grew stronger, droughts longer, and fires more frequent. Each event carried with it not only destruction, but also the reminder that humans had altered the balance of the very systems that supported life. Climate, once dictated only by natural cycles, now bore the fingerprints of human hands. Alongside this warming came another tragedy unfolding in silence, the loss of life itself. Scientists now call it the sixth mass extinction, a wave of disappearances unlike anything seen since the asteroid strike that ended the age of dinosaurs. Species vanish at a rate hundreds of times faster than in Earth's long past. Forests fall to axes and chainsaws, oceans fill with nets and plastics, and countless creatures lose the habitats they once called home. Frogs in the rainforest, elephants on the savanna, fish in the deep sea, and even insects that pollinate our crops all face decline. Life that took millions of years to evolve is disappearing within a single human lifetime. And yet the story of the Anthropocene is not only written in the air and the forests, but also in the strange, enduring traces humans are leaving behind. Plastics, born from oil, now flow through every part of the planet. Tiny particles drift in the ocean, sink into the soil, and even fall from the sky like invisible snow. Future geologists, digging into layers of Earth, will one day find this plastic layer as a clear marker of our age, a permanent scar in stone and sediment. Radiation, too, has joined this signature. In the 20th century, the splitting of the atom gave humanity both great power and great peril. Nuclear tests scattered radioactive particles across the globe, embedding them in soils, ice, and even within the bones of living creatures. These isotopes will remain for tens of thousands of years, glowing markers of the moment when humans harnessed the very building blocks of matter itself. Cities, sprawling and vast, are another sign. From space, Earth now shines with webs of light, glowing lines and clusters that trace the pathways of human expansion. Roads crisscross continents, dams halt the flow of rivers, and concrete spreads like a second skin over the land. The once dark Earth has become luminous, revealing how completely humans have reshaped it. Even the animals that remain carry our imprint. Some species, like pigeons and rats, have thrived in the shadows of our cities. Others, like wolves and whales, have been pushed to the brink by hunting and habitat loss. Domesticated animals now outnumber wild ones by staggering amounts, with billions of cows, chickens, and pigs bred for food each year. The balance of life that once leaned toward wilderness now tilts overwhelmingly toward human needs. The Anthropocene is both a story of power and of fragility. Humanity has reached the point where it can alter the climate, rewrite ecosystems, and leave marks in stone that will last longer than any civilization. Yet the same actions that built this power threaten to unravel the very systems that keep life alive. Rising seas threaten coastal cities, vanishing species unravel food chains, and warming temperatures push the limits of what the human body can endure. This moment is unique in Earth's long history. Never before has one species carried so much influence over the fate of an entire planet. The fingerprints of humanity are everywhere, from the plastic in the deepest trenches of the ocean to the gases in the upper atmosphere. The Anthropocene is our mark, and it will remain in Earth's record long after the present generation is gone. The story of Earth continues, flowing onward from fire and ice to this age of human dominance. And while nature still shapes us, with storms and quakes and the quiet pulse of seasons, it is now humanity that shapes nature in return. The path forward will depend on how wisely that power is used and how deeply we remember that the earth beneath our feet is both fragile and irreplaceable. Through billions of years, Earth has proven itself both resilient and fragile. It has endured firestorms, global freezes, and the violent scars of asteroid strikes. Life has vanished in waves of extinction, only to rise again in new and astonishing forms. Yet as we look around today, it becomes clear that the balance of this planet, the delicate rhythm that has allowed life to flourish, is far more fragile than it once seemed. The climate, which feels so stable as seasons turn from spring to summer and back again, is in truth a tightrope stretched across deep chasms. Just a small push in one direction can send the system into chaos. We know this not from imagination, but from history written in stone, ice, and fossil. Past extinctions tell us how easily Earth can shift into conditions where life struggles to survive. Take the great dying of the Permian period. It was a time when volcanic eruptions flooded the skies with gases, warming the planet and suffocating the seas. More than 9 out of every 10 species disappeared, leaving the land silent and the oceans nearly empty. For millions of years afterward, life hesitated, struggling to find its footing again. That extinction was not caused by humans, but it is a reminder that when the balance of gases in the air and oceans shifts too far, the web of life unravels quickly. Another lesson comes from the asteroid strike at the end of the Cretaceous period, the event that ended the reign of the dinosaurs. A single object, only a few miles wide, was enough to plunge the world into darkness, cool the air, poison the seas, and silence creatures that had ruled for over 100 million years. It showed that survival on this planet is never guaranteed, and that catastrophe can arrive without warning, sweeping away even the most powerful of species. The freezing of Snowball Earth tells another story. For reasons still debated, ice once spread from pole to pole, sealing oceans under miles of frozen crust. The entire surface glittered white beneath the sun, reflecting its warmth back into space. For millions of years, life hung on only in scattered refuges, clinging to cracks of warmth near volcanic vents and thin layers of liquid water trapped beneath the ice. When the freeze finally ended, it revealed how even small shifts in atmosphere and sunlight can send the whole planet into extremes. All of these events whisper the same warning. Earth's balance is delicate, and when it tips too far, life pays the price. Today, scientists look at the rising heat, the thinning ice, and the vanishing species, and they hear echoes of these ancient catastrophes. The conditions we are creating through the burning of fossil fuels and the reshaping of landscapes resemble the beginnings of past collapses. Greenhouse gases thickening the air call to mind the suffocating skies of the Permian. Species disappearing from forests and seas mirror the losses that have marked earlier mass extinctions. Fires, storms, and floods remind us that when Earth's systems become unstable, change spreads quickly and with a force that no single species can control. There is a haunting thought that lingers in the background of every warning. Could we be standing at the threshold of another great dying? Could our time, like that of the trilobites or the dinosaurs, be cut short by forces we helped unleash? No one can answer with certainty, but the patterns of history suggest that Earth does not bend without breaking. When pressure builds too high, when balance shifts too far, the response comes not in centuries, but in sudden, devastating jolts. Yet it is not only fear that arises from these lessons. There is also a reminder of resilience. Life has survived 5 mass extinctions, clinging through ice and fire, adapting and rebuilding in the ashes of disaster. The question is not whether Earth will endure, for the planet has always recovered in time. The question is whether humanity, and the world we know today, will remain part of that story. The brink we face now is not only scientific but emotional, a recognition that everything we hold dear is balanced on systems more fragile than we once believed. The air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we grow, and the rhythms of the seasons all depend on stability that history has shown can vanish swiftly. To live in this moment is to walk with both awe and unease, aware that we carry in our hands the power to protect or to push too far. As we continue forward, past and present flow together like mirrors. The rocks tell us what has been lost before, the ice tells us how quickly the world can change, and the forests whisper how much there is still to lose. Standing on this brink, we are part of a story that has repeated across ages, but now for the first time, the turning point is shaped by the choices of one species. As we look across Earth's history, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Every dominant creature that has walked this planet eventually yielded to time, disaster, or change. Trilobites once swarmed across ancient seas in their billions, yet they are gone. Dinosaurs ruled for more than 100 million years, towering over land, sea, and sky, yet they too fell silent. Even mighty mammoths, with their long tusks and woolly coats, could not withstand the shifting climate and the arrival of human hunters, so it is natural to wonder what comes after us. Will humanity be different, or are we simply another chapter in the long book of life? Our power is unlike anything that has existed before. We have learned to split atoms, send machines beyond the solar system, and alter the very climate of our world. Yet power has never guaranteed permanence. The Earth is patient, and it has a way of humbling even the most dominant of species. If another great extinction unfolds, whether driven by our actions or by forces beyond our control, survival may hinge on adaptability rather than intelligence. Some scientists believe that the smallest creatures, those that live in shadows and soil, may be the most likely to endure. Insects, with their astonishing numbers and resilience, could inherit ecosystems left in ruin. Rats, already thriving in nearly every city, could multiply into new forms, filling niches left behind. Even birds, descendants of dinosaurs, have proven their ability to adapt across climates and may continue to evolve long after we are gone. But what about the possibility of a new dominant intelligence? Could another species rise to not only survive but to shape Earth as we have? Dolphins and whales already show signs of complex communication and memory. Octopuses, with their problem-solving minds and strange bodies, have long been considered one of the planet's most alien thinkers. Primates, our closest relatives, carry sparks of curiosity, tool use, and social complexity. It is not impossible to imagine that, given millions of years, one of these groups might grow into a role that echoes what we have done. Yet the story of Earth does not need to end with our disappearance. Humanity may still endure, battered but alive, reshaped by the trials of the future. If we were forced to retreat into smaller numbers, we would face the same test life has always faced: the ability to adapt, to change, to cling to survival in difficult times. The question is not only whether humans will vanish, but whether the human spirit of creation and cooperation can weather what lies ahead. Earth itself will continue no matter what. The planet has already survived the death of more than 99% of all species that ever lived. When the skies darkened after the asteroid, when volcanoes poisoned the air in the Permian, when ice sealed the seas during Snowball Earth, life always found a way. It may have been reduced to single cells huddling near volcanic vents, or tiny creatures clinging to scraps of food in dark oceans, but it endured. And from those remnants, life grew back stronger, stranger, and more diverse than before. This resilience is Earth's greatest story. It reminds us that even if humanity stumbles, life itself will not end. Forests may regrow on our ruins, rivers may carve through empty cities, and new species may wander streets that once echoed with human voices. Fossil records of the future will preserve our bones alongside the remains of cats, dogs, and cattle, a thin layer of memory pressed into stone. But above those layers, fresh life will bloom, continuing the endless experiment of evolution. There is something humbling in this vision, but also something comforting, to know that Earth does not depend solely on us, that its story is bigger than any one species, can soften the fear of endings. Our role, for however long it lasts, is part of a grander pattern, one that stretches from the first spark of life in the oceans to whatever distant creatures may walk here millions of years from now. So when we ask what comes after us, the answer is not simple. It may be nothing like what we expect. Perhaps humanity will endure, smaller but wiser, learning to live within balance. Perhaps another species will rise, shaped by challenges we cannot imagine. Or perhaps the world will be ruled by no single dominant life form, but instead by a chorus of countless resilient creatures sharing the earth together. What is certain is this: life will continue. It always has. It will bend, it will break, and then it will grow again in forms no one today could predict. Whether we are here to witness it or not, the earth will write its next chapter, and its pages will be filled with new beginnings. When we step back and look at the entire sweep of Earth's history, from the first grains of cosmic dust that gathered under gravity's pull to the rise of oceans, forests, and creatures of every form, we see a story so vast it almost feels impossible to hold in our minds. Yet, somehow, here we are, living in this moment, part of a fragile thread woven into a tapestry that stretches back more than 4 billion years. We are Earth's latest chapter, but not its last. Every mountain, every river, every tree, and every breath you take is part of a journey that began long before humans ever existed. The ground beneath your feet is not just soil and stone, it is the remnant of ancient collisions, volcanic fire, and the slow grinding of tectonic plates that carried continents across oceans. The air filling your lungs carries atoms once breathed by dinosaurs and trees from forgotten forests. Even the water you drink has cycled through glaciers, storms, and oceans for millions of years. Everything around you is ancient, yet alive in this fleeting moment we call now. The truth is that everything we know is temporary. Continents drift and reshape, climates warm and cool, species rise and fall, and civilizations grow only to fade into memory. The earth does not stand still. It is always moving, always changing, always rewriting itself. And we, though we feel so permanent, are here for only the briefest of instants in its long story. A single lifetime is but a spark against the vast canvas of time. Even the whole of human history, from the first tools shaped in stone to the cities that glow at night, is only a heartbeat in the life of the planet. There is both humility and wonder in this thought. Humility, because it reminds us that we are not the masters of Earth, but participants in its unfolding. Wonder, because it reveals how extraordinary it is to exist at all, to be here in this fragile balance where fire, ice, and gravity have conspired to create a world capable of nurturing life. Every sunrise, every star that emerges at dusk, every drop of rain that falls on soil is part of a miracle that has been billions of years in the making. When you look at the sky tonight, remember that Earth itself is a miracle born of fire. Out of violence and chaos, out of lava oceans and asteroid bombardments, came the conditions for life. From single cells to forests filled with song, from mammals hiding in the shadows to humans gazing at the stars, the improbable became real. Our world was not guaranteed, yet it is here, spinning quietly through the dark, carrying oceans, forests, animals, and us along for the ride. And so the story is unfinished. The earth will continue to change long after we are gone. Mountains will rise and fall, seas will shift, ice will return and retreat, and new life will take shapes we cannot yet imagine. Perhaps humans will endure and adapt, perhaps other creatures will rise in our place. But the planet will keep writing its story, line by line, moment by moment, into a future as mysterious as its past. The wonder lies not only in what has been, but in what still could be. Somewhere far into the future, new species may stand where our cities once stood. Forests may reclaim the concrete, rivers may carve fresh paths across the land, and the traces of our existence may become fossils pressed deep into stone. And above it all, the sun will still shine, the stars will still burn, and Earth will still spin, carrying the story forward. In the end, we are part of something far greater than ourselves. We are not separate from Earth's story, we are written into it. Our bones, our breath, our voices, and our dreams all belong to the same planet that once burned with fire, froze with ice, and now glows with life. To live with this knowledge is to live with awe, a quiet recognition that every heartbeat is part of a miracle billions of years in the making. So as you rest tonight, let the thought settle gently within you. You are living on a world that should not have survived, and yet it did. You are breathing air shaped by ancient oceans and eating food nourished by soils older than history. You are here because Earth endured when so many chances for life could have failed. And though nothing lasts forever, the story continues. Earth's pages are still turning, and for this brief moment, we are inside the story, alive, aware, and able to wonder. That is its own kind of miracle. If you have enjoyed this rendering of Earth's history, kindly give this video a like, and please consider subscribing to the channel. Good night.